And then let's start tweeting these out here. Let's start tweeting out the links here. All right. All right, everybody start tweeting that link out, and we will start doing this here. Okay. We've got some people in the chat. Hopefully some people will start showing up here in a second. Hello, everybody coming in, and welcome to Lean Toss Up Super Thursday. Now on Friday. It's now morphed into a Super Friday. Welcome, everybody, as people are
That's how
starting
super.
Yeah, that's how Super Thursday works. It was so super, it actually got pushed into Friday. That's how super it truly was. So yeah, so welcome everybody. People are starting to come in now. Where are the wombats? Unfortunately, I don't think we can. Something happened to the wombat picture. I'm not sure exactly where it is, but we'll find it at some point in time. It was more important to get the Sky newsfeed here, which is on YouTube, so it's free. So, hello everybody. People are starting to follow in now. I'm Martin, obviously your host. Today we're going to be joined by Alex, or Akasituan on Twitter. Hello, Alex. How are you doing?
Pretty good. It's still before noon here in sunny southern Saskatchewan, so I'm pretty eager to offer my unqualified commentary on the UK local elections. This is what you guys deserve for naming everything in province after your little towns.
Okay, and we're also joined today by Jason. Jason is he's a local in the UK. He knows UK elections, and he's worked with some parties in the past. Hey Ryan, how are you doing today?
Hello, I'm doing okay. It's a little bit later here, 6:30, so you may be getting up, but I'm starting to, think about dinner already, I guess. Yeah, have perhaps mildly more insights on the UK that we'll see if I can give on local areas.
All right, sounds good. So, right now we're looking at the BBC results maps. We've got BBC results map for the for the English local elections. These are the county councils and the district councils. UK local authority model over here, as you can see, on an absolute heater. We have breaking news here. We have our third wrong call actually. Plymouth. We actually thought. We have a third wrong call. We thought Plymouth was Lean Labour / NOC, and it turns out that that NOC has picked up Plymouth. So that is a third wrong call. The other wrong calls were Southend on the Sea. We thought the Conservatives would pick that up. They did not. And Sheffield, we thought Labour would hold that or it would go to NOC. It turns out it went to NOC, so we're going to think we're wrong there because we kind of defer on a call there. So NOC means no overall control. So there's no.
Which is the party gaining in Plymouth?
Let's find out. That's a good question. Who is?
I would assume the Conservatives.
Yes. One second. I'm just. Yep, Conservatives are up 6. Labour is down 6 in Plymouth. It's dead even 21-21, and then the Independents have 8 councils. Oh, counting underway after 12 of 19 seats declared. Okay, so there's still seats up though. Apparently,
It is
they're saying
a
there's
city where for several elections now the two constituencies have been split Labour Conservative. So they each have their own respective better half of town, but there's not been as much change there as in other places in more recent elections, I thought.
Mm-hmm.
It would be... I guess no overall control wouldn't be that surprising given that split, but Labour would be not hoping for the kind of devastating results they've seen elsewhere.
It hasn't been the worst. To be fair, though, they are defending, according to our ward model, they are defending 8 leave seats and 3 kind of split seats. So that's kind of what that is. The majority on Plymouth Council is 29. They're calling it NOC, I'm realizing now, because they said they've declared 12 seats. Both are at 21, so with only 7 seats left to declare, no party can achieve an overall majority. So they've declared it as NOC. So that makes sense. Let's go on to Scotland. Let's see. Let's refresh the Scottish Parliament. Okay, so Lib Dems hold Edinburgh Western. I saw that on Twitter a second ago, and yeah, we have that here. So this is about a 7-point LD win. Let's see how big they won it by. I hate this BBC map for this reason alone. While they won it by substantially more, they won it by almost 20 points. So that's a big gain for them. They gained 12.5. Oh, no, sorry. Oh, Lib Dems won it by that. So Lib Dems actually gained a huge share. But see, this is where we're starting to see some, what I think at least, is strategic voting. Oh, you guys can't really see that too well.
Yeah.
Let me...
In both Edinburgh Western and North East Fife seem to be examples where the Liberal Democrats were doing well at getting the tactical unionist vote. There's clear sort of transfers from the Conservative vote to the Liberal Democrats. But something that wasn't replicated in their other target seats, they tried to take one of the Northern Highland seats in Caithness, where they gained some votes seemingly from Labour, but without holding it, hadn't been able to convince Conservative unionists to back them. But they've been doing this now in Edinburgh Western and in Fife at the general election 2 years ago, and again showing that they can get Conservatives on board to stop the SNP in these seats.
Oh, I think someone said the SNP has held more. Yes, they have. The SNP has held more. That is actually against the model. The model thought that was going to be a lean Conservative pickup. They thought the Conservatives would win by about 4 points. Let's see what the actual result in Moray is. SNP winning it by 8. So this is interesting here now. So we're seeing. So that's the third round call in Scotland of the 79 seats. Sorry?
Was Douglas Ross himself standing in Moray?
Tim Eagle.
Because he used to represent that in Parliament.
Are you talking for Conservative or for the SNP?
Yeah, the Conservative leader for Scotland.
No, it's not him.
I believe still is parliamentary stands for Moray. I don't recall if he was changing where he was going.
No, it's Tim Eagle standing in for the Conservatives. He lost it by about 3,000 votes. So, that is a good that's a good result for the SNP. However, though, still pretty close. And this is where we're starting to get. So it's seeming like in the safer seats, we're definitely seeing strategic voting, but the SNP is holding on to the marginal seats, which is good. That's exactly what you need if you're the SNP to do. That being said, though, where this will start hurting the SNP is in the list constituency. So, for example, if I can actually just find super quickly Alex's final projections here. Let me see the projections he had for Wales or Scotland and Wales.
Yeah, yeah. I had the SNP taking 2 list seats,
Exactly.
one
Yeah.
in the south and one in the Highlands. Those are the 2 regions where where they weren't going to sweep all the constituencies, but with with one different constituency in the Highlands, that list seat might just come off the board and have no actual net effect.
Exactly. So this is the thing, right? So in the South, they were scheduled to get 1 list seat. The fact that they picked up Ayr, which it's so small you can barely see it here. The fact that the SNP did pick up Ayr means that they're likely to not get this list seat. In the Northeast, they weren't expected to get a list seat. This was a seat that we thought was going to go to the Conservatives. The SNP did pick it up, so that one actually might be kind of a free seat for the SNP. However, though, looking over here, when you come over here, this one, Aberdeen South and North Kincardine. This is a seat. It's a toss-up lean SNP hold. Not guaranteed that they could win this. They could actually still lose this seat. It's very close. But again, if they did win this, it probably could win this. But again, if there's a lot of error associated with this, right? So I'm not 100% sold on this. That being said, winning Moray is a good sign for this, though. But that being said, especially when we come over here to the Highlands, the SNP were supposed to get a list seat. This is because the Lib Dems basically get 2 of these like extremely small constituencies for free. We thought Moray would go to them, but if the SNP pick up Moray, then it's looking like they'll lose a list seat here too. So technically, um, not a lot. Like there's some SNP gains, but only by a couple seats or 2. We had them at 63. I believe majority is 64, if I'm not mistaken. So, um, this is
65, I think.
yeah. So these are still close. So we are definitely not done here yet. So it's good for the SNP. Definitely, you definitely prefer to be the SNP. I didn't mean to click on the New York Times. You definitely prefer to be the SNP. But obviously, I don't think we're not in the point where it's like 65 seats for the majority there. It says. So we're definitely not at a
Nothing
point.
has happened.
Yeah, nothing
Sorry, I
is.
was just going to say nothing has happened to suggest that the SNP wouldn't at least be returned with the Scottish Greens as their junior coalition partner again, or supporting them.
Yeah,
They
no,
have been rather than a formal coalition.
100%. Yeah, they're
which is
still in. Mhm. Yeah, at minimum, the SNP is still the dominant party. That's fairly obvious. That's exceedingly obvious. And I guess you guys don't really project in
which
Canada.
is still,
Oh, go ahead.
considering the Scottish Greens are also a pro-independence party, that's still a good result in terms of their overriding mission. But obviously, I think if they wanted to use this election to face off with the national government for a second referendum, they really did want a majority, but that remains on a very fine line.
Yes, that majority is a very fine line, and to be honest, it was always going to be a very fine line. It was never going to just be a blowout one way or the other. Now coming over here to Wales, this is the one area where Labour has not yet been destroyed. So basically, one of the gains that we saw, Vale of Clwyd, that came through. That happened. Vale of Clwyd up here. That was a gain that happened. However, though, we thought it would be. We thought that the Conservatives would also gain Wrexham, which is a seat that they won in 2019. Turns out they actually held Wrexham, which, to be honest, was quite surprising for me. I definitely didn't think they'd be able to hold Wrexham, but here we are. They did hold Wrexham by a pretty sizable majority, too. If we come here for a second here, they won it by like 1,300 votes. That's actually really good for them. I did not think that was going to be the result, so congratulations to them on that. And now we're starting getting into some other parts here. So the North is still holding strong. We thought that the Labour would hold Delwyn and Clwyd South, which I believe those are actually 2 seats that they do not hold in Parliament. They actually held them with greater majorities than we thought they would. And then coming down here, we thought that Labour would. We thought that the Plaid Cymru would win carefully, and Blaenau Gwent. Turns out Both of those are wrong. Labour has held both. We have a new result for Blind and Gwent. Let's just go take a quick second and look at that. Well, look at this blowout here. Plaid down 20% in Blind and Gwent. That's kind of shocking, honestly, that it was hurt that badly.
One of the lessons that seems to strike me, first of all, with the Welsh result, and also to an extent the Scottish result, is I think we should perhaps give voters more credit for understanding the different levels of government. Because I think, well, Nicola Sturgeon, obviously, but also Mark Drakeford and the Welsh Labour have taken as many opportunities as they can to show that they're doing a thing different to what the national government has done. And so whatever, talk about COVID vaccination bans in UK, there's an argument to be made that, voters in Wales are also rewarding Welsh Labour for their handling of the past year, or however long the term has been, but also at the same time that Plaid are suffering as a minor coalition partner.
And that is true, yeah. I'm still not 100% sure that Labour will be able to win it. I don't think they're going to get the outright majority that they want. But still, though, they can do a lot of damage. They can be basically they might actually, we might be looking at them gaining seats, which sounds crazy at a gain of seats of Labour in Wales, considering the fact of how badly they're going to do everywhere else. The interesting thing, though, is, again, though, looking at our Welsh projection here, as we just call it up here on the screen, in terms of the list seats, so the list seats are the ones you saw here. We thought that Labour would gain a list seat in Central. Currently, that seems like that could check out, depending. We didn't think they'd get one in the North. They're definitely not going to get one in the North. They're kind of overexposed here, so theoretically, all it's going to do is just going to increase it. Now, we thought Abolish would get a lot of votes. They've been definitely underperforming in the constituency vote at this point, but their strength is definitely on the list vote. So we're going to have to see. We don't. It's too early to say whether or not they're affected by this or not, and we don't know yet. So we're going to have to wait until we actually start seeing some constituency votes. But we might be able to. Maybe you can start We had Plaid getting quite a few constituency votes. It's very possible Plaid has suffered a pretty big loss tonight, so those might not be Plaid seats. But if Labour's overperforming in the constituency, those probably aren't going to go to Labour. They're probably going to go to the Conservatives. So we'll actually have to see. I'll say you all seem to be having connection issues. I'm not sure what do you mean by that. If you can clarify. Okay, we seem to have another seat declared. Dumfriesshire. This is a Conservative hold in Scotland. The model has this as about a 6-point Conservative win, and Conservatives win it by about 10 points. So again, SNP overperforming a little bit, which was expected. Oh no, they thought SNP would go down a bit. They went up a little bit. Conservatives actually went up substantially from where we thought. They went up 10 points from their last time. We thought they'd go down a little bit. So that's actually a really good result for them. So
Just notice the surname of the Conservative candidate. I don't know if he's related to their MP of the same area.
That could be true. Oliver Mundell. That sounds familiar, yeah.
Yeah, so David Mundell is a Conservative MP of the same area, and he was the only Conservative to survive in Scotland in 2015. So the Conservatives holding this isn't that surprised, but it's just, I thought, interesting. Wikipedia seems to suggest that Oliver is his son.
Huh.
So they've used a family name as well.
Okay. Interesting.
Oh, he's also been in the Parliament since 2016 as well, but...
They're saying, SNP take another seat, Inverness and Narn. They've had that already. That was a safe seat. So that's not, Inverness and Narn is not really that's not really a particularly interesting seat at this point. Yeah, going through. So let's take a look. We'll kind of pass it because we're still waiting on some Scotland results. And the thing is, to be honest, a lot of the ones that are close, we won't start seeing for a while here, right? So the ones I want to see the most are probably, well, one, I want to see the Edinburgh seats, right? Edinburgh, Central, and like the Edinburgh ones here. We have an S&P gain in Edinburgh Central, and we have an S&P gain over, well, S&P gain over the Conservatives in Central, S&P gain over the Labour in Edinburgh Southern. So we definitely want to see those. And then I want to start seeing ones. So Penshire South and Kinrossshire, we have that one as a bare S&P hold. Angus South would also be interesting. It would kind of, it's a bit, it's also competitive, just like Angus North. Again, these could cancel each other out. Aberdeen South, um, even Aberdeenshire East. This one could also be a kind of interesting, um, an interesting seat here too. It's in this kind of area. It's a bit more rural. Maybe the SNP could hold it. Also Dumbarton. This is a seat kind of in Western Scotland here. This we're projecting Labour to lose this seat. Nothing I've seen so far today has disproven me of that. Or no, actually, sorry. This isn't. Is this West? I believe this is West Scotland, right?
Where are
Yes, it
you
is
referring
West
to exactly?
Scotland. Yeah,
Dumbartonshire?
Dumbarton.
Yes.
Dumbarton, yeah. Dumbarton is in West Scotland, yes. So that could be an interesting
Yeah.
one. And again, we're at this point, just because the S&P is winning seats doesn't mean they'll get a majority. They need to win some list seats. And the problem is them winning constituency seats actively hurts them in winning those list seats. So we're gonna have to wait and see. We're still far from done counting in Wales, in Scotland, and also in Wales. So we're gonna take a look at that. So let's kind of take a look at the council. So last night, um, obviously, a lot of people online were shocked by just the absolute destruction of Labour in a lot of these northern seats. Um, the thing is, to be fair, though, they didn't actually flip. So you're looking at like Sunderland, South Tyneside. We saw some from Northumberland, but Northumberland did flip. It was actually it was NOC Conservatives officially gained control. Um, but the issue is though that like although there was massive gains, Labour still actually technically holds them because only a third of some of those seats were up. So while those losses were large, they haven't officially shown up on this map yet. They won't until probably next year. By the time you're starting looking at next year, you'll have had 2/3 of the council up under this condition. So this is kind of where Keir Starmer is going to be kind of put under a gun at this point because basically they still have some time left before they lose some of these districts. Sunderland is one, and the thing is, if you lose Sunderland, that's a big problem. Um,
Uh,
oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I mean, Sunderland probably does get overanalyzed because it's almost always the first to declare.
Exactly.
But it is one place that, because of this electing by thirds, it slowly changes. But it has. I know it's thrown up some surprising results to many observers, but it's the opposition parties in Sunderland have shown that they've known how to concentrate their efforts in quite an effective way. Where they've just turned one seat at a time, and each time the third comes up, and then eventually they get all three there and move on. And both the Lib Dems and the Greens have done that in parts of Sunderland in ways that wouldn't necessarily make sense in terms of what their national profile is.
Of course, yeah.
The other thing to note with Sunderland, colloquially, it arguably has one of the worst reputations of any Labour council. Amongst the scandals that have, and this is something that you can accumulate by being a long-term, incumbent governor, is eventually, voter apathy, but arguably complacency, but also an accumulation of scandals. It has a number of former councillors who have been criminally convicted for various things, along with, allegations against former leaders, which has particularly hurt the Labour Party there. So there's perhaps reasons why that's become even worse than many others would expect, and why other parties, not just the Conservatives, have been able to find a way in just by battling against a local reputation as well.
Mm-hmm. So I'm just actually realizing now that I actually had I actually had by accident both streams up, so that may have been why our stream was a bit laggy. So now that those are gone, um, that might actually help us a little here. So that might make the stream a little less laggy, guys. Um, so everybody's just kind of joining in right now, so that's fine. We're still waiting on a lot of results here. We should be getting Mayor of London. I have Twitter up on the other tab here, so if we start getting some London mayoral results, that's why we have the Sky feed here. So we'll go to that in a second. So um, what are your thoughts here? In Jason, there you mentioned about Sunderland, and you said the Lib Dems and the Greens were making gains that weren't expected. And to be honest, what you said right there is exactly why we did the that's it's basically why we did the local authority model the way we did, because we can't sit here and be like, well, we can't sit here and be like, well, because if we were to just simply project this, we would probably have like the Conservatives gaining pretty much every seat in Sunderland, and that would be pretty much it, right? And if we go here, this is the UK ward election atlas here. Let's kind of zoom in on Sunderland here, and we can see how Sunderland looked in 2019. Just one second here. So again, remember, these are our projections of how Sunderland looked. So these are not, this is our data. This is the precinct data map the precinct model that we released a couple weeks ago. This is all basically added up down to the ward level. And this is Sunderland right here. So as you can see, if we were to project who would win and lose some of these races in Sunderland, we would have them as Labour conservative battles. But the Lib Dems and the Green Party have started winning some of these seats in Sunderland. And even when you're looking at this, basically LD has actually started winning some of the Leave seats. Some of these seats are Leave. So this is Sunderland. You can see it here. And then if we go to the EU referendum on this, we believe every seat in Sunderland voted Leave in some capacity. Some closer. Some seats here, like Doxford, we had it about 55, 45 roughly. A couple of them are closer. 53% Leave here in St. Michael's. But pretty much every seat is Leave, or at least a very strong Leave component here. So Jason, why is it the fact that we're starting to see, you mentioned it before, why are we seeing Lib Dem and Green pickups in some of these like pretty Leave constituencies that you would never expect them to be here?
I think it's in part what I said earlier about voters do have a better idea of the difference between local and national than we often give them credit for. And I think, in terms of just the Conservative success, a lot of voters are perhaps thinking that, they give us more attention when we start to vote for them, and they like that idea. But also, when someone is, and this affects many political parties and politicians, when they're an incumbent for whatever period of time, it is very easy, the longer that you feel that you're safe in there, to both sort of perhaps become a bit complacent in it. But also, I think in some cases, some of those Labour councillors generally don't have much experience of fighting contested elections before, which has been partly why it's shown that the Greens and the Dems have had success on really just concentrating all their efforts on one vulnerable member at a time, and causing a shock. But because they're being able to feed off a bit of voter apathy, the idea that it's always been this way, but then people aren't necessarily happy, and just throwing a kitchen sink at one bit at a time, and they're breaking through, because these ultimately aren't very large places. Committed, a local party, if they've got no one elected, as the Greens probably and the Dems probably do still have members in that area, but they didn't used to have many people to campaign for. They have an ability to talk to a lot more people than perhaps Labour do. And the Greens as well are having some big other successes in place, like in Merseyside and in Sheffield as well, which presumably has similar lessons from it. But also, there are, I know of a few scandals that have particularly hit the Sunderland Labour group, which has dented their reputation in particular, because you also see some Labour groups that are holding up somewhat better than that, whereas that group has actually been losing a seat year on year, that this by thirds election has been up. for a little while now.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think that's when you're looking at some of these local authority results, the key thing to remember is that they are in fact local. They're local, and that's when you analyze them, that's how you have to do it. I'm getting people in the chat. They are talking about Edinburgh Central. Let's see if it's up on the BBC. It is up on the BBC. Edinburgh Central S&P gained from Conservatives exactly as we believed.
Which is the return of Angus Robertson, who used to
Yes.
be their leader in Westminster for the SNP.
Yes.
I forget exactly what seat he used to represent. I believe it was in Perthshire somewhere, and lost to the Conservatives at the last election.
Yeah, I think Labour holds this seat nationally. We had it about a 6-point S&P win. They won it by 12 points. That was a huge gain for the S&P there. We thought they would. We thought they'd be roughly staying, maybe up only 2 points, but they actually gained a ton. And the Conservatives obviously are down. They're down substantially, down a little less than we thought, but still though down. But the thing is, when you start looking at like Labour and the Greens, this was a strong Green constituency in 2016, and the Greens just got flattened here. So.
That is another thing that can especially affect the smaller parties. If they, put a big effort in, perhaps they did in 2016 in Edinburgh Central, and don't make it across the line, it's very hard for them to keep that up. They do sort of go for an all or nothing at times to get across the line.
Yeah, especially if you have a good, especially if you like,
Labour never can sustain that.
Especially if you have a good candidate. Like if you think you have a good candidate, and you're like, cool, we have it, but then the next time you're like, that guy doesn't run again. You're like, okay, well, we're not putting anything into this seat, right? So, expected S&P gain in Edinburgh South Central again. It's still too close. We don't know yet on the list seats. So
it should also be said, because there are more seats, even just constituency seats in the Scottish Assembly than there are in Westminster. So Edinburgh Central doesn't exist in Westminster. It's divided up between a few constituencies, but nonetheless, I believe it's just 4 Westminster constituencies. Is 3 of them are SNP, with just the western one, which mostly matches what's here in the Assembly being Lib Dem. It might be 5 in Edinburgh overall in Westminster.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Sorry. Okay, so let's kind of go over here to Wales and see if we have anything new in Wales. Labour has held Bridgend. It was what we expected them to. We expected them to hold it by about 10 points. Let's see how they did. Yeah, okay, so they won it by 14 points. So we thought Labour was on 42. Labour was on 42. We thought they were on 40. So about 2 points off. Conservatives gaining, losing a bit more. Let's check Plaid here, though. That could be kind of important. Plaid actually a little over what we thought they were. So Plaid kind of seems to be a little bit of rebalancing. It's still down, though, but some rebalancing around. Strong independence, though, here. We have 13% independence in Bridgend. So again, this is the question, right? Where are these votes gonna go in where are they gonna go in in the list vote, right? Are they gonna be abolish seats in the list vote? If they are, then like that's the interesting thing we're gonna have to take a look at here. So right now, Jason, what is the most interesting local election result you've seen so far? Is there anyone that's really surprised you? Is there anyone that you think is still yet to be surprising? What do you think?
In terms of surprising, the Conservatives appear to have taken full control of Cornwall, which is surprising only in that it has a reputation as being more independent-minded. It's had one of the highest number of independents on any council for a long time, but less so in terms of the more general rebalancing. It's been a place that the Liberal Democrats historically did well and have been receding from. While at the same time, Labour have been making progress in the major city in Truro, but much smaller compared to the overall county there. A lot of them are just 2019 taking effect. But I guess the Welsh results are, I guess, the most surprising so far overall, just because it is starting to make a relatively different tune to for Labour nationally. They seem to now be talking up their ability to take Rhondda, which I'm not certain how to give a proper Welsh pronunciation to, but that would be a big one because it's a seat of a former Plaid Cymru leader who's defending, and a place where Plaid had wanted to be able to make progress historically had done in the Welsh Assembly into old Labour heartlands in Wales. So that would be huge for Labour in terms of showing that they're still very strong in Wales. A few years ago, they were worried about the Conservatives coming up, and they're still doing well there. And that is a good news story for them. That, I guess, to say it's surprising is a disservice to them, but it's certainly distinct from many of the other areas.
Well, I mean, it's not a problem to say it's surprising. I mean, it's still. I mean, if they're losing everywhere and they're just not losing in Wales, then it's still surprising that they're losing in Wales, that they're winning in Wales, right? I mean, we could still say it's surprising, but they'd be like, it's surprising in a good way. Not like. I mean, we have a lot has been said about Labour. And so far in the last day or so, and yeah, they've had some pretty bad results, but again, they can have good results too. So you'll ask me, we probably don't get any list results today, right? No, I don't think we are. You need every single seat in a region to declare. I don't think we're going to get there. These results in Wales.
I wouldn't expect list results until every constituency is in, and then it will be another day probably.
Yeah, no, the people are saying that the Welsh results are good. Yeah, here's the thing, they are good for Labour. The question, though, and this is the thing that's going to have to be asked, is why are these ones so much better for Labour than when you look at the demographics of some of these seats, right? I mean, you're looking at, so again, we have Leave Remain in the Wales model. These are the official estimates. We actually have Leave Remain in the Scotland model as well. Those are actually our estimates based off of our Leave Remain data from our precinct model, and those seem to be working pretty well too. But when you come over here to Scotland, when you come over here to Wales, sorry, and you look at some of these seats in Wales, these are pretty strong Leave seats, right? Like you're talking Rhymney, right? This is a 57% Leave seat, right? We're looking at Gower, 53% Leave. Bridgend, 50. Well, it's 52. That was kind of lower, but when you're looking at a lot of these seats like Wrexham, almost 60% lead. Vale of Clwyd, 56% Leave. They actually look a lot more like a lot of these seats in the north does, right? We were just talking about Sunderland. Obviously, here you can come over here in Northumberland. A lot of Leave seats here. A lot of the seats that Labour was losing last night. Hartlepool, right? Every seat here in Hartlepool voted Leave, right? When you're looking at these seats share a lot in common with Wales, and yet somehow Labour isn't losing these ones yet. So we're gonna have I don't know. It's a bit complicated as to, it's more than just global realignment, and then more along the lines of the global realignment is just not happening in Wales. It's still happening. The question though is, why is it not happening? And it could be local effects, right? The local Wales Labour, they seem to be distancing themselves from the National Labour Party. That could be very much helping them too. So yeah, I think there's a couple of reasons why, but definitely in Wales at least, Labour is doing far better than they did in 2019. So we're gonna have to see. As an American observer, were these elections good for the Conservative Party? Yes, definitely. Definitely in England. You can argue that they haven't been great so far in Scotland. That's definitely true. And well, Scotland's been okay so far. I wouldn't say they've been bad. They have lost a seat. They have a couple of also potential gains that they could make. So they haven't been great in Scotland, and they have not been great in Wales. But in England, which is the largest part of the UK, they've been pretty good. Jason, what local seats are you looking for? Because we still have yet to see. and as we said last night, we've seen a lot of the district councils from like the north, and we've seen some of these. We're starting to get some of these ones in kind of what I feel is the red wall here, kind of your like Liverpool, Manchester, Yorkshire, Leeds area seats. We're gonna get a lot more of those in the next little bit, but we're starting to get some results here in the southeast. Now these are the ones where if there is truly a realignment, this is where you're going to see Labor and the Lib Dems start picking up seats. So, are there any are there any councils you think in the southeast, something like Surrey or Gloucester or Oxfordshire? Do you think that the Lib Dems and Labor can make gains here or not? What do you think?
Um, I mean, some of the results that have come in around the area that look better for Labour in terms of if they want to change their, vote to coalition and pick up places that they've not done before. There are some good signs in a few of the Kent seats that they've won, but that's also solidifying around Canterbury, which they won at parliamentary level for the first time in forever. I believe in 2017 they first won it. In Colchester, it looked like they had some decent results, which is a place that once was a Liberal Democrat, has been a place where they've declined since the coalition, and where Labour have successfully been eating up that non-Conservative vote, and it's very much probably one of those sort of towns in the general, more south in a very broad sense, that Labour could make advances. There's not too many results on that front coming through. One of the big ones that has declared is the Cambridgeshire local authority has gone no overall control, which has been, again, Labour have eaten up what used to be a Lib Dem vote in the city of Cambridge itself, but there's also been big changes in the south of the county, which is overall a pretty affluent area with lots of highly educated people that have, been through the university there, is showing signs of what could be a place of, and a model perhaps of receding Conservative vote if other parties on the left and centre, etc., are able to find new ways to fight back against the Conservatives. That's been a moderate success story for them today. There's not too many others that have seemed to have come through just yet.
Yeah, Cambridgeshire is an interesting one. So we forecasted it to be a lean NOC. Basically, the majority is 31. Conservatives are going to end up on 28. So that was actually a pretty good call. That it wasn't like guaranteed to go NOC. They are making some gains here, but the issue though is the fact that although it's great that Labour is picking up some seats, there is not a ton of actual constituencies here. Now, for example, obviously Cambridge in here, if you're looking at the Westminster, Cambridge is it's its own constituency, which Labour holds very easily. Then you get Southwest Cambridgeshire, which is a Lib Dem target. They came close to winning that in 2019. But then outside of that, when we're looking at other things in Cambridgeshire, like Huntington, that's not particularly close.
The realistic targets there is only really South and East Cambridgeshire for the Liberal Democrats. Peterborough still, wasn't actually a part of that, but there's going to be the police and crime and the mayoral later in that general area, and we'll see whether Labour is still viable there. But no, there aren't too many other targets there.
Mm-hmm. Okay, people are saying that there's 7 more seats expected for the 7 more seats expected in Scotland today. So we will have to see. We'll have to see if those come in or not. There's probably a couple more. The interesting thing though is that again, the seats that we have seen are tending to not be 1 Conservative seats or 2 close seats. So basically, the seats that we need to see the results in we need to see Aberdeen South, we need to see Aberdeenshire East, Aberdeenshire West. I'd love to see Galloway here, Eastwood. There's other seats we need to see, right? We need Edinburgh starting to declare some pricey. Edinburgh Southern in a second here, Perthshire South and Kinross-shire. These are some we're starting to get some seats, and that's good. But the issue is that the seats we're seeing are not necessarily the most competitive seats. So, I'm waiting on. I'd love to wait on those, and we'll probably have to wait till tomorrow to see who's actually going to get the majority. Then by the time all the seats are declared tomorrow, then we'll probably get all the list seats. So, um, I'm thinking that that's going to be the interesting thing on that. So let's see if anything new is in Wales. Okay, Newport East Labour. I think we actually had that as a very close seat, if I'm not mistaken. Well, we had a somewhat close seat. So this will augur for Newport West. We had Newport West as Labour hold. Let's see how much they won Newport East by. Newport East was a 14-point Labour win, according to our model, and they won it by 16. So not bad. Not bad at all. And again, that does augur well for Newport West, the seat right beside it. I think people had said that Labour has already lost the Vale of Glamorgan. It's not on the BBC map though. Some people are asking if 2 or 3 seats might trickle in after. It's possible. I don't know. They're usually pretty exact with. Oh, and Kaylin, what do you mean the amount of seats in Cambridgeshire? Oh, how many seats would be? How many federal or national seats would be competitive? Maybe like 2. That's the thing. It's only 2 seats, right? There's other seats in Cambridgeshire, but the other ones are rural, right? Like Huntington. Actually, we can call that up here.
So in Cambridgeshire itself, there's the one seat in the city which is held by Labour. There are then North East Cambridgeshire, Huntingdonshire, South and East Cambridgeshire, I believe, are the other constituencies, all held by Conservatives. And that was all part of the county area, of which 2 were seriously targeted by the Liberal Democrats at the last election.
Mm-hmm. So let's, I think we'll call that up in a second here. So, Labour has held on to Doncaster. So we had this as a lean Labour hold for the council. Labour only down 3, Conservatives +4. That's actually really good for Labour. That's a sneakily good result for Labour. We had them defending 40. All of Doncaster Council was up, so we had them defending 42 Leave seats, and it turns out that they held most of those. They needed majority was 28. They needed half of those, and they got the job. They got the job done. They got 40 of those 45. So, again, they only lost a couple seats there. So not the worst result there for Labour in Doncaster.
There's an argument to be made that a bit of the doom of Labour is biased by which is announced first in the northeast, because just comparing even similar areas, we were obviously talking about Labour Labour in Wales to the northeast, but similar places like Wigan and Greater Manchester, as well as Doncaster and Barnsley areas in in South Yorkshire, are not as bad as we saw in the northeast around Sunderland and Tyneside for Labour. So there's still a bit of that realignment happening, but it does seem to be different rates in different regions. There is better Labour strength in Wales and perhaps in the northwest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good point on that too. That that basically the longer you have that basically the Northeast seems to be having larger losses than kind of the Yorkshire and the Northwest. Now that actually does make sense in a lot of cases, because these are much more urban, suburban, right? Doncaster is like a city, right? Like these are a lot less remote. Like you can actually travel to Westminster, Manchester, to Leeds. These are within within a major city. Sunderland is the major city, like Newcastle and Sunderland. These are the major cities here, right? Like this is a much more built up area than over here, right? So, it's partly based on suburban reversion. Yep, go ahead.
It'll also be interesting to see when we get ideas of the mayorals, whether there is a top of the ticket effect. because Labour has, especially in Manchester, a relatively well-known, with some good publicity mayor at the top of the ticket for all those boroughs, whereas the Conservatives had an incredible result defending their mayor in Teesside. And they will do as well, or well, they have a mayor defending in the West Midlands as well. So we don't know that yet, and there's questions to be answered about whether that helps some of the more the down ballot races in terms of district councils or not. But that could be one of the things to look at.
Mm-hmm. So that's the point on that. Let's see, and that's the other interesting thing for the mayors. So I don't have Doncaster mayor actually went pretty well for Labour. That could have been a lot worse. I thought I had kind of penciled it in being a lot worse. So good for them on not getting blown out on that one. Moving on, I think do we have any mayor? Does this show mayor results or not? Oh, England mayor. Okay. There's no map for this. Well, that's sad. Okay. Wish there was a map for the mayors, but there's no map for mayors. Anyways, so we'll still wait on. Sorry.
I was just saying there isn't. The only ones declared, it appears to be Doncaster and Liverpool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which both were Labour holds, which was completely expected. So we should we're gonna have so we'll have to see how London goes. Now the Conservatives are making noise about London being closer. I don't believe that yet. We're gonna have to see. I don't believe it yet. Let's see how let's see where that comes up. I really don't think they can actually win. I do not think they're going to be able to hold that seat, but we're gonna have to see. Let's see. Do we have any new Scottish Parliament results? I think someone asked if the seats we're going to get in Scotland are useless. I definitely think they are. As you're seeing now, the seats that are being declared are tending to be more rural, or the ones that are being declared are tending to be more urban, with the exception of some of these ones, which I think just have very small populations anyway, so they're able to get the county together pretty quickly. But the ones you're seeing are more are more urban, right? Like we've seen a lot of the Glasgows come in. We have very little here in the south. Again, the south is a huge counting area. Not a lot here in like the Aberdeenshire area over here. It's sad because specifically these are the seats. Oh, Penrithshire North. Okay, so this is actually one I wanted to see. Perthshire North. Let's see what the margin is here. So we thought the SNP would hold it by 5 points. SNP hold it by 10 points. Yep, so very little marginal change there. We thought there'd be a swing against them in that. There was not a swing against them, so that's kind of interesting. So yeah, so that's actually a really good result for the SNP too. Someone's saying Labour keeps Southern.
Southern where?
Yeah, that's a good question. What's Southern? Southern what? Edinburgh Southern? Is that I don't know what the chat's saying.
Edinburgh Southern would feel that instinctively surprising.
I'm here. So people on Twitter are saying that apparently on Twitter saying, yep, Labour has held Edinburgh Southern. So that would be a very interesting hold. And that could start.
Well, I imagine, I don't know how exactly the borders correspond, but the Westminster seat of Edinburgh South has been where Labour have held their seat continuously without ever losing it to the SNP, although close in 2015. So if there's anywhere where they've managed to get unionist tactical votes behind it, and perhaps being able to translate that into the Scottish Parliament now as well, it's not surprising that Labour would have been putting in a lot in that area and have perhaps seen success.
Yeah. All right. So that's good. So we thought Labor would win it. We thought the S&P would win this by about 6 points or so. Turns out Labor has won, has flipped it, made the model wrong. They have won this by 9 or so points. So that's a good result for Labor. That's a bit of a weaker result for the S&P. And again, this is just another reason why I'm not ready to call this as a majority yet, because we still do not know the list votes, right? The S&P seem to be gaining a little bit in the constituency vote. They had been struggling in the list vote. So let's see if this is truly S&P support or not. Um, and
Just looking at the vote share changes, it seems like one of the best examples yet of Conservatives actually being willing to tactically vote Labour for a unionist reason.
mhm. That does make sense. So then so if we were seeing that, then because that would make sense, right? Because in Edinburgh Southern, we had the Conservatives at 18.9. What did they end up with here? So it does make sense that we're seeing some tactical voting here. Yeah, 11.6. So the Conservatives were at free fall here. They lost 7 points, and that 7 points is roughly what you'd expect the yeah, actually, because the S&P is only off 2 points in Edinburgh Southern, so it's very clear that there's some helpful voting there. So the next big one you'd have to look at would be Dumbarton over here in Western Scotland. We have that. It hasn't declared yet, so this could be a kind of interesting one here. So we'll have to see what happens there, but we have that one as an S&P pickup by about 4 points. So that one in the Conservatives have more than 4 points. They have 14 points. So very possible that if there's some strategic voting there, Labor could hold that one, which would probably make it better for an S&P minority. But again, we still do not have those list votes. Those list votes are very crucial here. And again, these seats right here. Literally every seat that could potentially be competitive is one that hasn't been declared yet, with the exception of like a lot of these are like these ones aren't, but the rest of these ones could start being potentially competitive, right? Like Eastwood, Conservatives could hold that one, right? Like the only ones we've seen Labor like the S&P pick up are ones that we projected to be like some of the closer ones, right? Like this is a hold. We thought they might pick that one up. They picked up Air. They only lost that one by a couple points last time, so nothing too crazy yet. So we're gonna have to see. We need to see those list votes to be able to know where things are going. Let's see here. Let's see if there's anything new in Wales. Nope, nothing new in Wales. I think Plaid Cymru has one Yins Mon. Okay, gain for the Conservatives in Yins Mon. Again, they hold that nationally, so that does make sense. Anything locally happening? I wish we had, or do we even know when we're going to get London mayor results? Is it going to be tomorrow or?
BBC seems to think tomorrow. I don't know particularly what makes it so slow, but they've got the mayoral as well as assembly elections go with that there. But there's nothing that's suggesting it's going to be soon in London.
Yeah, that makes sense. That sounds like London.
So, do you say that Plaid Cymru have gained Ynys Môn from the Conservatives?
No, it's a hold. I said they
It's a hold,
they
right.
have it nationally, right? So that's what I meant.
Yeah, they have it in the Assembly. The Conservatives do have it in Westminster, though.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, someone's saying we're left with 6, so we won't know today. Yeah, we definitely won't know today. Even if it was the 6 that I wanted, which I don't think it will be. But even if it was the 6 I wanted, it's still a very good chance that because we still won't know because of the seats, right? Some people are just saying it's like, oh well, the S&P needed only a couple seat gains, and they've already made it a couple gains. Like they picked up Air, and they picked up Edinburgh Central. I think they picked up something else too. I can't remember. I think they picked up from our model. They picked up those 2 seats, but They've already picked up Edinburgh Central and they picked up Ayr, so people are like it's over, but it's not so fast, right? Because we still don't know these seats, right? They could lose those seats, and then those could just be losses canceled out by the list seats, right?
Also, in the Scottish Parliament, so the SNP have been in a minority with support from the Scottish Greens, and the Scottish Greens only stand on the list vote. They don't stand in any of the constituencies, and they've done quite well getting in through people splitting their vote and allowing them to think, oh, I'd like to have some Greens in the Assembly. So they get split ballots that are SNP or Labour or Lib Dem quite often, and so the SNP don't do as well on the list vote as they do in the constituencies. And I mean, you've also had this break away from the SNP, which admittedly I'm not certain how well it's going to go for their former leader, Alex Salmond. That is also standing on the list seat. But you should expect the SNP to not poll as well on the list, but they didn't do it last time either, so is it well enough?
Yep, so apparently the SNP are rumored to be 25 votes ahead in Dumbarton, Labour demanding recount. So that could be, so that's exactly what we were talking about, right? We literally talked about that minutes ago, right? We literally said if there was conservative strategic voting like Edinburgh Southern, it would be in Dumbarton. And sure enough, it's in Dumbarton, right? So that's going to be 25 votes. That could be.
I was going to say that 25 may sound small, but in terms of a recount, the margin of error for a recount will only find clerical error in counting. That would still be quite a lot in terms of just clerical error to change that result, even though it's only 25. But that's still nail biting for them all the same.
Mm-hmm. Well, that one could be going to a recount. That one could take a while, but again, oh, I think the Labour just held a seat in Wales. But no, 25 is still, like, you're looking at thousands of votes. 25 is still extremely tight. All right, Newport West. We do have the Newport West result.
It's very small in terms of total number of voters. But if you stacked all the ballots on a paper, you can see the difference of 25 votes in terms of, that pile is a few centimetres taller. And what they'll be doing to check is, did any ones go in the wrong one? But especially with some of the local elections, you will see ones that are decided by a singular vote or zero even, and then I think legally it is a coin toss. But yeah, the recount will take a little while, but 25 is still enough for the SNP to have their fingers crossed right now.
Yeah, and this is the thing, right? We're looking at, so we got Newport West here. Labour is on the board with a win here. They've won this by about 12 points. We thought it would be substantially smaller. It is not. It is very clear now that projected like, we thought the Conservatives would gain 6. We thought Labour would be down 6. That didn't happen. It's very clear that the Labour is overperforming expectations in Wales, which is surprising because, again, we thought that this would be very similar to the Northeast, and it was not. So we are wrong in a couple of these seats in Wales. But that being said, though, this is actually kind of really surprising that Wales has been able to keep it together. So if Dumbarton is close, and then again, remember that is West here. That's the West Scotland. We did not actually have a list seat. We had the SNP winning that seat, and then them not getting a list seat, which is true. That would be how that would work. But if the Labour did win it, then maybe the SNP would be in the mix for a list seat there. We have Labour picking up 2 list seats there, so that would kind of cancel that effect out a little bit. So overall, though, even if Labour doesn't comes close in Dumbarton, it could be very good on the list seats because I'm not exactly sure how. Although people are strategically voting in the constituency, I'm not sure how are they strategically voting on the list? Can you even strategically vote on a list? So, but the fact that people are strategically voting constituency means that there is a desire to stop the SNP from getting a majority. So, could that lead to something else? I don't know. maybe people the thing is, if people are strategically voting to stop the SNP on the list vote on the constituency, does that mean that there's a bunch of people here who are kind of like they voted for the SNP constituency, but they're not, they just like their MP, like they just like their MSP, they don't want a different MSP, right? So they're like they might vote against the SNP in the list, but we don't know yet. It's still too early to tell. But I mean, here's the thing. So majority is 65. How many seats are there up? Well, we have do you have vote shares or not? Okay, so right now we have the SNP is at 47% of the vote, which is a little less than some of the polls had said. The vote share, constituency vote share had then about 50%. LD is at about 9%. Conservatives at 20%. Labour at about 21%. So Labour is overperforming the Conservatives in the list vote. In constituency, we don't have any regional votes. Oh, we got someone said another one came in. Let's find that one first, then we'll kind of go through those. Then we'll go through those list votes, those regional votes here. What have we got? Let's see if we can't find it. While I'm just trying to find this new result, I'll ask you, Jason. Gun to your head, is it a majority or a minority?
For the SNP?
Yes. Oh, Aberdeen. Sorry, it's Aberdeen Central. We will look at this result here. I'll call this up just because it could impact the Aberdeenshire result. Yeah, SNP up 1%, Cons up 1%, Labour down 7%. Again, there's some strategic voting, right? Aberdeenshire Central. We had this as about a 10-point win for the SNP. SNP won it by 20 points because we had the SNP actually down a lot more. We had the SNP down 5, Conservatives up 5. Still hold for the SNP, but they're doing a little bit better in this area than we thought. That means Aberdeenshire West could be in jeopardy for them. They could be in jeopardy in Aberdeenshire West, which would really help them if they were able to sweep this kind of Eastern Scotland. That would really help them because they weren't going to get any constituency votes anyway. Basically, if they were able to flip that, then I definitely think that could. If they are able to, I mean, it's still a while away. They weren't particularly close. They lost that by 13%. We have them losing by that 13%. Even if you just ignore that, it's still like a 3-point lead in Aberdeenshire West. But again, if they're able to hold that, that would be very good for them. But again, that's still pretty far away from Aberdeen Central, right? That's a rural area, kind of closer to Moray and Angus North, right? So not a lock that they're going to be able to take it. But this one, the Aberdeen South and North Kincardine, that one could be very useful in determining who wins that one. But anyway, back to you, Jason. Gun to your head, who's got this in Wales, in Scotland? Sorry.
Just looking at those couple of constituencies, if they are able to flip them for the SNP just in Dumbarton and in Aberdeenshire West, if they're able to do that, then I would say they'd get a majority because it doesn't matter that they then don't get anything on the list seat because they would have been incredibly efficient with their 47% average vote share in getting as many seats guaranteed as possible. With 47%, if they're only missing one constituency, they still don't get many list seats because it's allocated on a slightly proportional manner after that. So that one pickup in a place like west of Scotland where they already had so many constituencies that they weren't being offered many other list seats can make the difference because they're just squeezing out that last bit of efficiency. Only things that could wreck that is I guess parts of I think the South Scotland can be particularly bad for that if they're going to miss out on a list somewhere. But it's the fact that there were only 2 seats ultimately I think off a majority last time means that the amount of change needed to get them across the line, if they are just tipping 1 seat here or there, is probably just about enough. And the only loss that they've had well, have they had a loss to the Conservatives? But they've had one loss to Labour, I believe.
Yeah, well, it's a Labour hold. It's not really a loss.
Well, in Edinburgh Southern, was it not?
That was a Labour hold. We thought it'd be an SNP win. It was actually just a Labour hold.
Ah, okay, I'm getting that wrong then. Then, yeah, if they're just picking up 2 seats there, then they didn't have list seats necessarily that many to lose, so they could just squeak it.
They could. It's going to be really close. It's going to be really close. Right now, they're plus 3 seats. Let me just call up 2016 Scotland election. Oh, whoop. I wanted to tap. So in 2016, one second here. Let me just. Whoop. Okay. Someone's saying Eastwood should be soon. That one would be interesting. That could maybe determine it. So in 2016, the SNP they had 69 seats. They lost their majority in 2015. They then went down to 64. They went down 5. Or sorry, they won 63 seats because they had already lost 5 before. So,
and of those 63, only 4 were on the list seats.
Yes. So they had 3 seats, 3 lists in southern Scotland, and then 1 in the Highlands. Now, again, as we're seeing here, with Ayr gone, the SNP picking up Ayr and them picking up East Lothian, those list seats are probably gone. So, with those list seats gone, that's kind of already a... Oh, East. Someone's saying Eastwood is a con hold. Let's see. Someone's saying that. Let's see if that is in fact true. Oh, this sucks. I'm trying to move the windows over here. Sorry, guys. Oh, yep. Someone's saying Conservatives hold Eastwood. So let's see. Yep, Eastwood is a con hold. Let's see the margin here in Eastwood. Okay, so Conservatives up 6, SNP up 5. So this is a 4-ish point win for the Conservatives. Let's see what we had. We had about a 5-point win for Conservatives, so that's pretty good. We had them going down, though. We had Labour going down 6. I think they went, just looking off the thing, yeah, they went down 14. So there is definitely strategic voting happening here that has not happened before. You've got a Labour candidate losing double what we thought they would, more than double what we thought they would, and that's going to them. So now this is where this starts to get interesting. So, and this makes sense now. So they hold on to this seat. If the SNP have picked up Dumbarton, because remember, actually they did not get a single list seat in West Scotland last time, but they got one in the Highlands. The SNP got a list seat in the Highlands. Let's see here. Well,
because the Liberals managed to get 2 seats out of the islands in Orkney and Shetland, which are very small populations, but are guaranteed a constituency based on their remoteness, basically, to protect their interests. But that means that that the SNP actually get marginally underrepresented just on the pure constituencies, because those 2 go to the Liberals.
Mm-hmm.
And thus, it's easier for them. And if I think most things are looking the same in the Highlands, then they should be able to get another list seat there.
Exactly, yeah. So this could be interesting. This is not done yet, guys. We're not done. We are not done in Scotland here. It's going to take tomorrow. We're not going to know tonight. We will not know tonight who's going to win it. I think it's going to come down to it's going to come down to Dumbarton. 25 seat votes seems actually like it's a relatively large margin. Let's see if Labour can overcome that in Dumbarton. Again, there's different things that can happen, right? There's There's provisional ballots. There's like certain ballots that they were fighting. Maybe they can get some of those overturned. But the thing is, honestly, at this point, is it better for Labour to win Dumbarton or not? That's the question, right?
I
Because
would have thought the SNP win Dumbarton. It's just a free win. There's no list seat that they subsequently lose.
I think so. Yeah, I would think.
At the same time, that Conservative hold, because I think it's in the same region. I might be
Yes,
wrong on
it is
that.
the same region. Yes.
Is also big for the Conservatives and bad for the SNP. For the exact same reasons, there are no SNP list seats there to be lost in order to counteract who's got a proportional vote share, is what the Scottish Parliament does try and provide.
Mm-hmm. So this might actually at the end might come down to whether or not the SNP can pull off any list seats at all, like literally any list seats.
Their list seats was 3 in South Scotland and 1 in the Highlands, so they're going to be getting the Highlands one, I would expect.
Maybe not. Depends on where that vote goes. It's very possible that might go somewhere else. It's very possible that list seat in the Highlands, if their list vote share is down enough, it's possible that could go somewhere else.
It would most likely go to the Conservatives, given that this is a place that has Labour is probably the weakest in the Highlands. So the Conservatives are the next strongest there, and if they're not getting any constituency seats, they will get list seats, and they got 3 last time. The Liberal Democrats are the next strongest there, but they get those 2 and have retained those 2 seats on these small remote islands, Orkney and Shetland. They've had for almost 100 years or something like. Is as close to a safe seat as that party has. But because of that, they're probably almost certainly not going to get any list seats there. Labour did get a couple of list seats there last time. It would take big increases, I think, in Labour vote share to get more out of the Highlands. But yeah, the Conservatives would be the ones best poised to take a list seat off the SNP.
Mm-hmm.
Are they looking like being viable in any of the constituencies in the Highlands?
No, that would be the only, with Moray not going to the Conservative, with Moray not going to the Conservatives, that would be it for the Highlands. So we have pretty much all the Highlands declared. So actually,
well, here I calculated the list seats, so I can actually run a simulation again, going past 7 to see which parties we have slotted into like number 8 and 9 if the SNP doesn't, if the queue gets jumped.
Okay, well, they're probably going to lose. The thing is, because they picked up Moray, we had them having the last one in the Highlands because they lost Moray. But if you want to try that quickly, just for the Highlands quickly, just to see what happened run it again if the SNP picked up an extra seat in the Highlands and the Islands.
Where is Ire as well in terms of the regions?
It's in the south.
So that may also lose them a list seat.
Yes. So this is
it was the place where they'd previously been inefficient with their vote share and not getting across the line in many places.
Yes. So I think the issue here is the fact that there's 2 seats in the kind of eastern Scotland that we've got. So I'm have our map up here. We have this seat here. What's it called? Sorry, Angus, North, and Mearns. We had that one going to the Conservatives, and we had Moray going to the Conservatives. So that's +2 to the SNP for now. So give them 65. That would put them on a majority, assuming no other changes. However, though, immediately come down here into Lothian, take away 1 seat. This 1 seat went to Labour. So that's now put the SNP back to 64. However, they picked up a seat down here in the south in Ayr. So that's 65. Dumbarton, we had that going Conservative. We had that going SNP anyway. So that's fine. But list seats now. Highlands and the Islands. They picked up Moray. We had 1 extra seat we had them getting that 1 list seat because of that there. So if that seat now goes SNP, then that means
Moray not a defence?
It was a defense, yeah, but the way our model calculates it, we assume that they had won that seat. So, because they had won that seat, that means that they get that extra seat back. So that means that list seat is gone. So that means they're back down to 64. And
I've just run this, and our 8th list seat in the Highlands, which isn't awarded, is also SNP. So. So if Alba doesn't get seated, which is rather likely, then you might still have at least one SNP list seat here. This isn't guaranteed. I'm not punching in the constituencies as they're actually being called yet, but that's what's 8th in our queue for the order that these are being handed out in.
Very interesting. Okay, very interesting. So it means we likely need an upset somewhere to stop the SNP majority.
But yeah, if no list seats change and they manage to pick up Dumbarton and Aberdeenshire West, then that loses no list seats at all, and that's the 2 seats they need to go from, just a majority.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, so we'll come back to the SNP here in a second. However, though, we actually have an upset here in Wales. We have Rhondda. Plaid Cymru has lost Rhondda brutally. Jeez, they lost. They're down 20 points in Rhondda. Leanne Wood is gone from the Welsh government. So that's a pretty crazy result here. We thought this would be a very safe Wales Plaid Cymru hold. Didn't happen at all. So that is another seat we have wrong in Wales. Again, we massively overestimated Plaid. We're gonna have to see how the list seats break out. List seats probably might be a little bit worse for Labour now because of this, but we didn't have them gaining a lot of list seats anyway, so we'll have to see how that all breaks down. But yeah, that's very bad night.
I'd expect Leanne Wood would be high up on the Plaid list to get a regional seat all the same, so she's probably not out the Assembly. But yeah, this is very much Labour restaking claims of, where they would describe as ancestrally Labour. It was a few election cycles ago that Leanne first got in there, and I think that success is what managed to make her a leader of her party for a short while before she stood down, because it was an impressive result for her, and this is Labour, reclaiming what they would, consider to be their territory.
Mm-hmm.
And it's good proof for them that this is them showing they can do that, and that's a reason for optimism for them.
Yeah, definitely. So the recap of what we're looking at here in Scotland is it is still really close. It is insanely close here, and honestly, we don't know. It's really close, and it's gonna come down to list seats, and it's gonna come down to fractional odds on list seats, and that's kind of crazy, to be honest with you. That it's gonna come down to just pure insanity of a list seat calculation or decimal fraction. It's gonna be crazy. Legitimately, it's gonna be a crazy day here. But yeah, that's this could be a very crazy day in terms of not today obviously, but tomorrow. This will be the this is going to be really impactful for not just for the SNP, but also for the history of Wales, right? Of Scotland, sorry, because if the SNP do get a majority, there will be another independence referendum, which means they're going to have to build an independence, an independent referendum model. But again, the SNP did exactly what they needed to do, and usually they choke. And honestly, I thought they would choke. Turns out they didn't.
It's also somewhat unknown how the Conservative government would respond to the SNP attempting a second referendum. They've been somewhat quiet about it, waiting for the election to happen. But they could have any response from trying to renegotiate how that question gets worded, do everything they can to make it as favourable as possible, kick it down further line, potentially even go for what the Spanish government did in Catalonia, and just saying, no, you're not having a referendum, and anything you do we're not going to recognise. Is some questions that haven't really been answered because they've not wanted to say anything that might bias this election result, which is crucial to Scottish nationalism, independence, unionism, all the same. And so we don't know how those strategies are actually going to unfold, even if the SNP gets a majority now, in how they then have to face off against the Conservative government in Westminster to pursue that independence agenda.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting. And it's going to be an interesting time for Scotland. And the thing is, though, my take on it, though, is it really so bad if Scotland leaves? Because the thing is, with a Conservative government, they naturally don't do well in Scotland. Would it not be more prudent for them to just be like, sure, leave, and then we just lock up basically the electorate forever? Without the seats in Scotland, is there functionally no way that Labour and Lib Dems could ever overcome them?
I think it is assumed by anyone in the Conservative Party that Scotland being independent would be, at the very least, damning for their reputation across the rest of the country. It's different in Northern Ireland. There's plenty of polls that show, to be honest, voter apathy towards the status of Northern Ireland within the rest of the UK, and whether Northern Ireland, whatever direction that ends up in future. I think there's certainly people south of the border do also have many views on what they would like to see in Scotland, whether they're sympathetic because they think Nicola Sturgeon is very impressive, and she's a remarkably successful politician. But also, I think there are many Conservative voters who, south of the border, would be furious. They would think, how could this be allowed to happen? So it's more than just saying, oh, we would lose 2 seats in Scotland to the Conservatives. I think many within their party would consider it, a fundamental threat to the nation they're trying to govern. They want it to not happen.
Well, why is when we look at this, it seems like Scottish independence is this big thing, but honestly, when you look at the polling, though, Northern Ireland independence is nothing. People that barely registers as a concern. Why is it that Scotland is so much more, and it's viewed as so much bigger to the Union than the Northern Ireland?
I mean, the Northern Ireland
it is Union, yeah.
What was your point? Sorry, I don't know if our time delays make it hard for me to hear when you start sometimes.
Like Scotland is the Union. That's what the United Kingdom is. Northern Ireland has always been more peripheral, more troublesome, and further away.
Yeah, I mean, to give what is admittedly an English perspective, not Scottish or Northern Irish, the United Kingdom is founded on the basis of the union, admittedly, of crowns between England and Scotland, and that is in itself a centuries older thing. Northern Ireland, its history and its status is much more recent history in terms of the independence of the Republic of Ireland, in terms of the Good Friday Agreement, and there are things in law about what would be the process for Northern Ireland to decide whether it wants to join the Republic of Ireland. It would have to have referendums on both sides of that border to change, and there's been always a minority in Northern Ireland that has pursued that, and that's also on the cards. The SNP's success has been more recent, and it's not with this backstory of 20th century. Well, quite literally, the Troubles was something that had to be, or was defining for British politics in Northern Ireland. It would just, I think most people would view it as something that fundamentally changes the country in a slightly more deeper way, not just in terms of there's a larger population there, that makes up part of the country. That simply because it's land connected, more people have travelled between England and Scotland than they might have done across the Irish Sea to Northern Ireland, between Scotland and England and Wales. But also, just I think most people, when they have more of an understanding of Northern Ireland, it is quite particular in how that its status is distinct because of the divisions between Catholics and Protestants in that area, and how Irish independence went down. And the Republic of Ireland is independent, and then there was a decision on what to do with areas that had more loyalist sentiment to Britain. Scotland as a whole has been part of the United Kingdom with England and Wales for centuries, and I think Conservatives in England, in Wales, and in Scotland find that a much more fundamental question. It's a very long-winded answer, but I think most people, from a unionist perspective within the UK, would probably see that as being quite important and distinct.
So we actually kind of have a very interesting map here. This comes from Election Maps UK. He is charting the he has the Cambridgeshire County Council results. So Labour has made some gains. They've made some gains specifically in the city of Cambridge. Lib Dems making gains in kind of outer Cambridge and some stuff up here. We had talked a little bit earlier about what this could actually translate into wins. So in terms of South Cambridgeshire, so we'll actually look at the local, the ward projection atlas here. Now remember, of course, these are not the actual boundaries. The actual boundaries. This is the district level boundaries. The county council boundaries. Those are that's a different level that we have. So these wards are actually a little smaller than your county council wards, as you'll see in a second. But again, this is the Remain area of the council, and then this is exactly where the Lib Dems are making gains. A couple more pockets of Remain in over here in some of these areas over here. As you can see, there's a bit more. Well, actually, that's pretty accurate in terms of that. We don't actually have the county council model up yet. We don't have the county council projection model. We did the projections ourselves that went into our model for the 2021 model, but this is just the district model for that. When you're looking at 2019, though, this is, again, these are not the exact same boundaries. These are slightly different boundaries, but Lib Dems making gains all the way over here. So Labour actually making some gains off the Lib Dems from 2019, but you're starting to see Lib Dems are starting to pick up some steam down here in the south here. So if we just come back here for a second, it's exactly the same areas we would expect based off of our ward model. Some gains up here, some gains down here, etc. Also some interesting gains over here in kind of Huntington here. This is some independence and some stuff over here. But overall, though, a pretty interesting night, though. And then looking at the Westminster here, unfortunately, although this is a great result for Lib Dems and we've seen the power of this council shift, only really this seat is up for play. Now, this seat could very easily flip to the Lib Dems. We currently have this as like basically a toss-up based on the results for the county council ward. That would look like the Lib Dems would pick that up, yes?
It's mostly good news for the Lib Dems, yes, and particularly in the South Cambridge constituency. They also did flip in what is one of the larger towns in the East constituency, which is Ely, I forget exactly how to pronounce that. It's not too many seats, but it is, it's good news for the Liberal Democrats. And there's probably, if we see similar results in Surrey, in areas that have a pretty similar makeup, well-off affluent places, that perhaps commute down to London in very Remain-looking places. That is good news for them, and there are potentially other seats similar to it, although not specifically in this area. There's just a few. Labour's gains within the city is more solidifying their hold than particularly gaining them any new viable seats.
Yeah. And that's the point here, right? So although we're looking at this here, and we're seeing gains here kind of focus on southeast Cambridgeshire, some maybe in South Cambridgeshire, Southeast Cambridgeshire, a little bit in Huntington, but still though, these seats up here, Northwest Cambridgeshire, they're still. I mean, again, we don't see shift here on these, but those are still very conservative, right? So, sure, maybe you could put 2 seats into play, sure, but at the same
But we've
time,
had
though, you can put 2 seats into play with the gains here. But again, when you're looking at the losses Labour is having outside of this, like sure, maybe these put 2 seats into play, but then you're looking at horrible losses up here in the Northeast, which put seats in down here in Yorkshire into jeopardy. It's not good. It is not great. It is not. It's okay, but it's not. It's not. It's not the best. Definitely not the best for Labour here. So, or for like it's progress, and progress is always good. But you'd hope that they would have. You'd hope that they could do a little bit better than that, though. That's the hope, is that they'd be able to have done better, but they
Yeah,
have not. So
it's not changed the fact that ultimately the Conservatives are remaining quite popular overall nationally. They have have had a relatively stable lead over Labour for a while, and then ultimately to win an election, Labour need to reverse that overall. But it is showing the kinds of towns in which there is growth comes more naturally easier to them, and what a new voter coalition could look like. And I was just checking to see if any of the other sort of counties around London had started to come through, and probably a county that is relatively similar to Cambridgeshire on the other side is Surrey. Has had a similar, not quite as strong Liberal Democrat success, and a singular Labour one isn't much for them. But there is this sort of commuter belt around London that's showing a muted shift away from the Conservatives. That's nothing like as strong as has been seen across the Atlantic. So Labour obviously need to do more work in terms of if they want to take advantage of any realignment in new areas they've not won before. But there is potential that's been shown.
yes, definitely. So Surrey, again, it is a con hold, as we're talking about the county council in Surrey. It's a con hold. However, though, that does not tell the whole story, as we are seeing a 13-point loss from the Conservatives, a 13-seat loss in the Conservatives here in Surrey. Still seats left to declare, so this could actually still go worse. And then we've got Lib Dems. They're at +5. We get down to Labour here at +1, but Greens pick up a seat. Independent picks up a seat. Residents Association, they pick up 3 seats. So it's a bit more mixed here. It's not a lock of like, there is opportunity to start peeling away Conservative vote share, but we're not. They have not been able to do it yet, and that is potentially becoming a problem. So we'll have to see. A lot of interesting times yet ahead for the future, right? I mean, we'll eventually get more elections in these seats, in these county councils. The next major thing won't necessarily be well, there's a by-election in these seats, actually. I think that's one of the ones, the Conservative MP who died, I believe.
In Cheshire and Amersham, which is just about to the west of London, it's south in Buckinghamshire.
Yeah, so it's it's not exactly Surrey, but it's not up for election now.
Buckinghamshire will be actually quite interesting when it comes in. One, because of that constituency, but it also includes towns like Wickham is a place where Labour haven't won, I think, in a general election. They probably did win it under Tony Blair, but it's arguably a seat where they could do better than they used to do there, and it'll be interesting to see if there are gains for them in places like that.
Mm-hmm. Oh, so we're starting to get some. We are starting to get some London results here.
Okay, I was just going to say as well, in terms of those residents' associations and the independents that you see, often their campaigns look a lot like what we were talking about earlier, where the Greens managed to pick up these odd seats from Labour in places that they'd held safely for ages on a sort of strangely concentrated effort, where perhaps being used to the idea of safe actually made you vulnerable in a few places. And independents and residents' association often play that role in Conservative areas, where they get that one person through who on their own with a group of friends, what have you, on a sort of localism opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we're going to come to the London results in just a second. Okay, so we have an update. Aberdeenshire Council says Aberdeenshire East constituency will not be completed tonight due to recommends tomorrow morning from 9 a.m. So that was one of the ones. That was one of the ones we wanted to see. Unfortunately, that one could be very close. Let's just kind of refresh this. I think someone said Kirkcaldy.
Kirkcaldy, which is in Fife, where Gordon Brown used to hold a seat in Parliament when he was Prime Minister.
Yes. I can't seem to find... It's in the...
It remains one of the places that is stronger for Labour.
Kirkcaldy. This was... We had this... Okay, we had this as a safe SNP hold. So, let's see here, though. So we had it at about a 25-point SNP win. Let's see what the SNP pull out here. Okay, so about a 22-point win. So, a bit of evidence of strategic voting here. SNP down just a little bit, which again, that is important here because that Kirkcaldy seat here, where it's in this area right here. Now it's closer to like it's closer to the Fife area rather than the Aberdeen area. But again,
so it is within, I think, the county of Fife, within Scotland.
Yes, but that is that part of Scotland. It is somewhat more remote. So it's not over yet. We're gonna have to see if someone could pull off some sort of upset tomorrow. If there's an upset of the SNP losing a seat somewhere, then they probably don't get a majority. And then if they don't, then it's going to come down to list seats, and we're going to have to see how that works. So, could be very, very interesting here. How this will all play out. Going here to London though. So we're looking at some results here. So we've got Mayor West Central. So this is Kensington, your Kensington area. This is your this is Kensington. This is cities of London and I think it's. Oh no, it's not cities of London and Westminster. It's very close to it though. But this is your Chelsea and Fulham. This is that area. Conservatives only win it by 2 points, so that's a bare Labour gain, -7.5 on the Conservatives. Green up 2.1, others up 4.2. So losses, Conservative losses, but not going to Labour though. They are not going to Labour. They're going to other places, right? So Labour had hoped to get this. This would have Kensington. This is the area that Labour is hopefully trying to win more in. Coming up here, they have a couple other results. Bexley and Bromley. Con only has 44,000 votes. He actually had 48,000 votes. So it's actually -4,000 from last time. But the Conservative is up from Bailey is up from Goldsmith in 2016. So not bad. Again, these are not places that look to be that you need to be winning here.
In terms of whether or not it's actually worrying for Sadiq rather than just bad optics that he didn't win by as much, these early numbers are coming from the more conservative parts of London.
Yes.
The east and south east of London in particular are the parts that are heavier leave. And then there is a strip that runs into central London where a lot of the financial establishment are, which has that more business background that has supported Conservatives. Although Labour has also been hoping that those are the places that they'd make progress in nonetheless.
Yes, no, and that's the point when we're looking at these, right? So at this point, I'm seeing nothing that disproves basically a repeat of 2016. I'm seeing nothing that disproves it. It's looking like a pretty safe Labour win and Labour hold. I'm seeing nothing that disproves that here at this point. So that being said, though, if you're Labour, and again, you're looking for places to grow here. If you're looking for places to grow, and again, Lambeth and Southwark, some more Labour area of the city. Con got 103,000 votes here last time. Goldsmith had 38,000. Con now only at 93,000. He's down 10. Bailey is only down 2,000. So swing against Labour here in Lambeth and Southwark. Again, not the biggest. It's fine. They're still going to win the mayoralty, but this is not what you want to see if you're trying to find new places to make gains, right? If you're trying to find these new seats, and especially in the London area, you want to.
Noticeable.
You want to start maxing these seats out. Yes, go ahead.
I was just going to noticeable as well that the Green candidate Sean Berry has had a relatively decent increase in her vote share just from that constituency. It is a place where they have more strength, but that might be one of the lessons for Labour in London in terms of how they managed the campaign, giving off, perhaps people did assume so much that Sadiq Khan was safe. And when people think, that the person that they're happy winning is fine, they often feel freer to vote for other parties that they like as well, and that's helped the Greens. And there are lessons for Labour in that, because in a general election they want to make sure that they're uniting as much of that left vote as possible behind them. Whereas here people have wanted to express some, or potentially the other issues that matter to them along on that sort of string of politics.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, again, so it is left wing, but the thing is, though, like, if you're Labour, you gotta be trying to, like, you gotta think, you gotta be trying to get you gotta be trying to, like, get those voters behind you, right? Like, I understand the fact that it's local, so people think it's less stakes, so they're like, yeah, we'll vote Green or Lib Dem or something, but, like, at some point, you've got to win those voters, right? And if you're not winning them here, like,
well, it'll be telling how many second preferences transfer from the Greens to Labour. I think that you would still expect to help Sadiq in the long run. The Lib Dems might split in a slightly less favourable ratio, although I'd still expect it to benefit Labour overall. But yeah, Labour also at the very least needs to be courting second preferences. And when it does change to first past the post elections, they rely on making the message it's us or the Tories, and if they've potentially taken their foot off the gas on that in London, then that's for their campaign team to analyse what they did. That because they would need to do better, because London is a place where they can gain seats still in Westminster.
Yeah, and here's the thing. So we've got Mayor Bretton Harlow. Conservatives actually gained this seat. They actually flipped it. They're up 1.5 points. Labour is down 5.5. Greens up 1. Others up 2.5. So this is outer London. This is an area that Labour holds. They do hold this area. I'm just going to call up our Westminster map here. But this is an area they hold, and the Conservatives hold it. Now again, Khan is not in danger. We're not hyping a Sean Bailey, Mayor of London. That's not imminent. But this is concerning. This should not be happening. I do not fully understand why. Like, this should not be happening. Labour should be holding these seats pretty strongly. So, again, this is becoming a little concerning here at this point. If you're Labour, like, the thing is, you're supposed to make, like, sure, you can lose. Like, my theory behind the case was, and still is, to be honest, it's like, fine, you can lose seats, that's fine. You want to lose seats, okay. You can lose seats in the north, that's fine. And then this is kind of the area right here. So it's this area right here. They have like a bunch. Labour has several seats here in this area. So we'll just bring that seat back over here for a second here. It's these seats right here. So this is actually Boris Johnson. You can see with the mouse here. This is actually Boris Johnson's constituency right here. Constituency of Ruslip, Northwood, Uxbridge. Sorry, it's the southern part of that. So that's their constituency right here, and it's kind of these ones. These constituencies are here, but it's this batch right here. This should be a Labour stronghold here. It's just not. They should be making the gains, and it was close. It was close, but you'd hope Labour can make the gains there, because here's the thing: if you're sitting here and you're Labour, and you're like, fine, we can't win back these red wall seats. These red wall seats are gone. Like, these northeastern seats we lost last time in 2019, if they're gone, and then also if you start losing Hartlepool, and then by the scale you lost Hartlepool, it means you have even worse losses on the board. If that's the case, then you got to look down here, and you're like, fine, we need to win seats like Hendon and Finchley and Chipping Barnet and Central, right? You got to flip back Kensington. You got to flip back Cities of London. You need to make gains in, like, even stuff like Chelsea.
They've not held Cities of London before, though.
Well, they got to make that, though. They have so they got to flip back Kensington, but they're gonna have to pick up
Kensington
cities.
Would be a flip back, yeah, but Cities is and Chelsea as well have had that particular financial establishment kind of economy within them that has been strongly conservative for a while. It's actually at its weakest for the Conservatives that it's probably ever been. But that nonetheless makes it Labour targets, but it would be fresh ground for them.
Mm-hmm. So apparently we're getting some news. Apparently Dumbarton is going to declare in about 15 minutes. So that's interesting. Apparently people are saying that the recount thing was a lie. So apparently that was fake news. So that's fine. We'll get that one in a second there. I think the big story though is Calum saying it doesn't seem like going forward Labour and Lib Dems are gunning for the same voter base. I mean, they are and they should be. But the thing is, though, at this point,
in many places. Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, in many places where they were competing, it kind of already got settled in the last 3 elections. Certainly post a coalition for the Lib Dems, people did start to coalesce around one of them being more viable in that area. So in the places where the Lib Dems have been showing some success, like we talked about in the areas in Cambridgeshire a little while ago, that was a place where the Lib Dems did overtake Labour to become a viable challenger. And there are places, hopefully we'll see stuff from the west of England around Bristol later, where it'll be interesting to see whether Labour have solidified their position further, where once they were competing with the Liberal Democrats. There aren't that many places where they directly compete now. We'll also see, I think, in the southwest of London, whether Labour are able to squeeze Lib Dem votes for Sadiq or not. But in many places where they did contest, it mostly has been settled as who is the most viable force to take on the Conservatives in that area.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like they are kind of competing for the same voter, but the thing is, it's like, okay, this is an area where the Conservatives are battling the Lib Dems. So if you're Labour, you can strategically vote Lib Dem. But in other areas, if you're in something like so, like for example,
voters can be very similar in both those areas,
but they have their own strategic targets. So, for example, if you're in Wycombe, it's a Labour Conservative battle, so you vote Labour. But if you're in Esher and Walton, Guildford, some of these Surrey seats here, you're like, cool, we're in a Lib Dem Conservative battle, so we're going to vote for that one, right? Now the thing is, though, and this is kind of the point here, is that yes, they're competing for the same voter, but there's different strategic bases. In some ways, it would actually make a lot of sense if they combined together to work on this together, or at least some sort of like strategic, like, okay, like vote thing, but apparently they can't do that for some reason. So
I mean, it is a long running theme in British politics that there is a sort of inefficient vote split. I mean, in Labour's most successful election back in '97, there was I believe, some sort of casual understanding between the Liberal Democrats and Labour that there were places the Liberal Democrats were challenging the Conservatives, and there were far more places that Labour were obviously stronger, and then they sweep to a landslide. But there was a lot of media as well saying this is your area where you vote to get up the Conservatives. Advising people in a few places to vote Lib Dem. There's not been a friendly relationship like that between the two parties since the coalition, at least, which has meant that there is still a lot of voter inefficiency, I guess, where similar voters are still. There's not any of these agreements between the two parties that make it functionally easier, because there are still a lot of differences between their membership bases, at the very least, between how they view each other.
Well, is it time for that to? Is it time to reconsider that now?
I mean, that's something that you could put to either party, but I think it's something that within the actual power structures of those parties would be roundly rebuted. Anyone that ends up in the Greens or the Lib Dems or any of the minor parties on those sides probably has ended up there with a very strong reason of why they didn't end up in Labour first or the Conservatives first. Because people know which is the opposition and the government, and they tend to have a strong reason to say why they dislike both of them, and then they might end up in one of those parties. It's something that always comes up academically as being interesting and always talks about that. There is this several centre-left or further parties within the UK that are sometimes splitting votes, and it did cost them a few seats at the last election. But it is a long way between any real agreements between those parties beyond the potential just for simple casual agreements of less campaigning in these areas. But there was still, pretty strong campaigning between Lib Dems and Labour in quite a few seats at the last election.
Mm-hmm. And that's the thing, right? It's going to be. My personal take on it is that they're going to just have to do it. There's not going to be any choice, really. I think I really like. If Keir Starmer is going to fix the Labour Party, I really think they're going to have to move forward with the Lib Dems. I honestly do. Do you see a path forward? Like, how can Labour fix this?
Who do you think the onus is on there? Is that a thing that you think Keir Starmer needs to? Because there's a lot of, ultimately just pride online for these parties to approach the other. There was an attempt where the Lib Dems and Greens worked together at the last election and did stand down for each other in a few seats, as well as with Plaid Cymru as well, that Labour didn't want to be involved with, because it rightly does assert it is by far the larger party. So it's never felt appeasing to the Labour leadership to think anything other than, well, we could just claim their voters outright.
I think the onus is on. The onus is on Labour. I think Labour needs to come to Lib Dems and say, look, like the problem is right now, although Labour is a bigger party, they're a decaying party. They're like a big, like a giant oak tree that's fallen in the forest and is decaying. And like the Lib Dems are this like small, or like basically like the small little tree that's like the small little plants that are growing up in the decaying oak of the big tree, right? Like the Labour needs to go to Lib Dems and say, look, you're growing in the south. We are barely growing in the south. We have these northern constituencies. And the thing is, if you join with the Lib Dems and you adopt a ton of Lib Dems policies, some seats are going to fall off. Like, yeah, Boris Johnson's probably going to win Sunderland next time you do that. He'll win Sunderland. And there's some seats that they'll still lose from that. But at the same time, you're still going to hold a lot of those northern seats. You're going to hold stuff like a lot of the Manchesters, a lot of the Liverpools. You'll hold a lot of those seats. But at the same time, if you join forces with Lib Dems, you combine the vote share of that and you adopt those straight up policies, you could probably flip a lot of your Surrey seats. You can make a lot of you could put a lot of dent in the southeast, southwest, even in the east. There's a lot of damage you can do. And I think that if you go to Lib Dems, the thing is, Lib Dems are in the position of power here because theoretically they can just do nothing and then they'll eventually become the viable party. Like if Lib Dems do nothing, within 20 years they'll become the dominant party. Labour, if you wait 20 years, they risk becoming what happened to the Lib Dems last time. Where the Lib Dems were the dominant party, and then eventually Labour developed their own constituency base, and they became the opposition party.
And where specifically, or are you speaking nationally?
Nationally. I'm speaking nationally, right? Because remember the last time there was a reversion in UK politics, it was Liberal Party versus the Conservatives, and Labour was this working class party that had a couple of their constituencies, and they really did well in those.
The invention of the Labour Party back in the 1920s is the last major shift, really, in UK politics. There's been a couple of times since where, maybe even three, where the Liberal Democrats or some of their predecessors, when they had the alliance between the Liberals and the SDP, which formed their modern party in the 80s, and when they went into coalition in 2010, were probably some of the closest moments they came to becoming a major party that could occupy opposition and then maybe one day government. The Liberal Democrats as themselves have sort of, they probably feel a lot like they're surviving still since the coalition. They've managed to also at the same time shift their voter base, perhaps in a way that Labour haven't done as successfully. Liberal Democrats used to have a lot of seats in what would be described like these Celtic fringes, so they still do in parts of Scotland, but they don't do so much down in west of Wales, in the southwest of England, but they are now picking up these places in the commuter belt of London that they didn't used to. But they're still quite a long way off between the 200 or so seats that Labour has and the I think 11 that the Liberal Democrats do. But they did achieve one big thing at 2019, although they didn't make many breakthroughs. the Liberal Democrats were going for this realignment strategy, and they did successfully reposition themselves as the challenger in a large number of sort of southern, south central-ish seats where previously Labour had got ahead of them. So they do have an advantage in a number of seats that could be vulnerable for the Conservatives and would fit realignment patterns that you've seen elsewhere. But it's more likely than I would think under the last Labour leadership that you could find agreement between those parties. And there's probably certainly within, I think, the parts of the Liberal Democrats, although their last leadership election also had this as a discussion point, and ended up being the more major discussion point for the losing leadership candidate, was being slightly more pro, we need to work with Labour in some way. So I think there's a way to go just in terms of their relationship, and how willing they are just, to cooperate, but even something that is just fighting less on where each other is in second place could still make progress on what happened in 2019, whether there were some places they contested and it was a clear realignment, and there were some places where in Kensington, in Finchley, quite a few of the London seats where they did just have a sort of scrap in a barrel and drag each other down.
Mm-hmm. All right, so I'm just gonna say we have some data here from London. So currently, I'll let you finish that thought in a second here. But current London mayor first preference share, currently Bailey is winning 38.2 to 37.4. However, though, giant asterisk on this. It's almost expected that she'd be winning it. They're definitely within the realm of possibility she could be winning. There's a lot of heavy Labour areas in London that are still out. So this is far from done. There's many more strong Labour areas left in London. So, and again, the thing is, this is not looking like this is not looking like a Bailey win. This is more looking like a Bailey makes it close. So, if you're looking at like actual results here, she would basically she needs to be doing a lot better than just tied in areas that are, because these are some of the better con areas in London too. So she needs to be doing better than just kind of tied. So, so we'll continue on that. So you think. So your central thesis is that you don't think there should just be straight up a merger. You think they should just kind of work together.
I'm not necessarily arguing that they shouldn't. I'm just saying that there are currently barriers in the way between those two parties just to get any agreement at all. I think the most likely agreement between them is very informal, something that, like what happened in '97, just where they have similar understandings of where their best chances are, and don't start spending a lot of resources against each other. I think in particular because there were defections from Labour to the Liberal Democrats last time. The Liberal Democrats put a lot of resources into getting those people elected, and Labour put a lot of resources into getting them not elected, because that's a very bad thing for you as a party, to think that people can leave you, defect to another party, and then have more success. So that there is, some calculation there that was sensible by Labour, but also the result of that was the Conservative MPs in a lot of these places. There would obviously be advantages to getting, the Conservatives ultimately out of power in Westminster if more agreements can be made. Potentially, this, if it's taken as a bad result for Labour and causes a rethink, there's an opportunity to reach out on those regards. But it's not something that's been obvious within leadership as a thing that they either need to do or are willing to do. And there's, in some cases, personal animosity, actually, just between MPs and former candidates. Because they've campaigned against each other and put in whatever on their leaflets to attack the other to try and get in, because ultimately a first past the post somewhat forces that on each other.
Yeah,
and that actually does remind me of one of the things that would be key to the Liberal Democrats, is they would want some kind of guarantee if they helped Labour that in return there would be some element of electoral reform, because that has penalised minor parties for the last century or more, and that is a thing that they would desperately want, and I don't see them being too willing to help get around the system that first past the post poses without an offer to ultimately fix that as the fundamental problem.
Mm. Oh, so we actually have some results here from the London constituency here. So, um, right now, London has barely held on to Eelington and Hillingdon. This is for the London Assembly, which is not the same as the mayor. This
Yeah.
is different. This is functionally a London. This is functionally a London City Council result, except it's actually not a London. It's complicated, but anyways, it's
Yes.
it's a bit complicated because there's also London. When next year we'll have our own London Assembly, or the London Borough Council, whatever. This is like a London City Council result. So Labour
Yeah.
hold Eelington and Hillingdon. Because it's the only red one on the map. It's the far left one over here. Not great. There are, as you can see here from the Westminster constituencies. So yes, we'll come over here to the Westminster
Yeah.
constituencies.
Some of these regions do mask the variation within them because a lot of them take, the sort of pizza slice out from the edge of London going inwards, like this one. That will have, the Conservatives would have been winning on that outer northwest corner of Ealing and Hillingdon. And as you get further into what is Ealing, that points towards the centre of London. That will be where the Labour vote will be stacking up more. So there's more variation in that than is just 40-36 throughout, and that's true for quite a few of these assembly areas. But if it's Labour will certainly be much better all the same.
Yes, this should be an area that they're trying to grow into, right? This is part of all of. Let me just check here. It, I believe, is all of Boris Johnson's seat because it has all that stuff in it. So yeah, this is actually all of Boris Johnson's seat. And if you're trying to make a gain in London, one of the seats you'd be targeting for a gain, that would be Boris Johnson's seat, right? So, again, yeah, not great, not great. So let's see here. Apparently, someone's saying we're getting Dumbarton soon. Oh. Nick Beardley from the BBC says Labour hold Dumbarton. Oh, we also have something else too. Wow, we have another piece of breaking news. We have the Lib Dems have lost their only seat in Wales in Brecon and Radnorshire, which turns Tory. Lib Dems now have no MP and no MSs in Wales at all unless they pick up any seats via the regional list. So we'll come over here to let's come back to Wales. Yep. Brecon and Radnorshire is done. Again, this follows the national level. The seat is a Conservative game. Oh man, that's a blowout. Jeez.
This is a very bad result for the Liberal Democrats. It's also one that has fought several elections just in the last 2 years. It had a by-election in Westminster a few years back that the Liberal Democrats won. That was regaining the seat, and then they lost it immediately at the 2019 election.
Yes.
Who was their only member of Welsh Assembly for the last session, stood down at this election, which did make this vulnerable for them. But nonetheless, I would have hoped to have been a lot closer to that. I've no idea whether that gives them any hope of getting a list.
They might get a list seat in the central. Yeah, in the central, that would tend to make some sense.
Wales has been a place where the Liberal Democrats have been receding. This was, some of their last holdouts. They have no seats there in Westminster. It has been, one of the regions where they've had bleakest success in for a while, and their polling there has been very bad.
Yeah, and now we're here now. So now we're at Dumbarton here. So Labour has held this seat so that the rumor of a 26 vote recount is definitely a lie.
Recounts can also be quicker than you expect once they've already done it.
They won this by like 1,500 votes. So that recount was a lie. That was clearly a false rumor. That's fine. It happens sometimes in the UK. We're sorry about that. So, so Labour has held on to this. Now that makes this battle becomes very interesting here. So, coming back to our Scotland map here. Now, we had this seat going to the SNP. That is -1 seat. Caleb, there was 1,500 incorrect ballots. Yeah. I mean, that's funny. It's true. I mean, there's people or someone just lied on Twitter, which I wonder which one happens more often. But that's funny. But no, so we didn't have the SNP gaining any list seats in West Scotland at all. Now, actually, you know what? We'll go to you now. Alex, do you still have that document up?
Oh, I have my list seat script up, yes.
Okay.
I'd
Actually,
imagine
do you have the regular seats up? Because you could probably run that then with that Labour seat there if you had it.
I wrote this to pull directly from your model spreadsheet, so it's not set up so I can just punch in the constituencies on election day. Now that I think it would have been a nice thing to include.
That's okay. What can you tell us? Who's the 8th constituency seat in the West?
8th in the West, that is, let me see here. I had the 8th list seat in the West going to Labour and the 9th going to the Tories.
Ooh, okay, so that means that the model thinks that the SNP is pretty much tapped in the West. So that would actually be a free seat back from Labour. That'd be a free seat back from the SNP. So that's interesting. So we now have Labour has picked up 2 seats from the SNP. So if we look at our model base, Labour has picked up 2 seats from the SNP, 1 in Lothian, 1 in the West. Then in the Northeast, the SNP has officially won 1 seat that we thought would go Conservative. So basically -2 from the SNP, then +1, so they're still -1. And that's it, I think, isn't it? That's it, actually. Yeah, that's all that we thought. That's all that's different from the constituency seats, I think. Or did we call another one wrong? Oh, Moray. Sorry, that's right. So they gained 2 seats from the Conservatives here in eastern Scotland. And then they lost 2 to Labour. So that's net 0 back to 63, right? So Labour's up to 19, Conservatives down to 26. However, this is where it starts getting interesting because none of those were really list seats. Now, Lothian, again, maybe the SNP's pretty much maxed out in Lothian. Like, I don't think they can, well, maybe not, because that was a Lib Dem seat. Maybe they have a chance in Lothian. South could also be interesting. Oh, Ayr. Someone's telling me I forgot Ayr. So the SNP would now be at 64 seats, assuming no changes at all to the list seats. However, though, maybe at 64, assuming no list seat changes. However, though, one of the gains was in the Highlands, which one of those gains was the SNP here. One of the gains was the SNP, so that could be a list seat transferring into that seat. So instead of 64, it'd be back down to 63. So we have 63. It is going to be insanely close. It's going to come down to literally, we're going to be waiting on every list seat, specifically in the South and the Highlands. And if the SNP don't pull off a list seat somewhere, then they're probably not going to get their majority. So it is going to be very, very close. This is what if you're an elections fan, this is what you live for here. We don't know what's going to happen. It's going to be really close. It is going to be really close here in Scotland. So very interesting. We're still in very interesting times here. So I don't know. Let's chat. What do you guys think? We got 15 people in the chat. Who do you gut feeling right now? SNP majority, SNP minority. I'm going to go first, then I'll get Jason to go. My gut feeling is SNP minority. Jason, what do you think?
That holder switched me to minority because I don't know where they gain on the lists if they're not picking up key marginals like that at constituency level.
We got the doped dude. Yeah, the dope dude, he said majority. Calum says minority. Come on, people. Cast votes.
I feel like it's almost, a tragic irony to the SNP. If it plays out as a minority with a very similar number of seats as they had last time, which was itself, pretty similar to their result the election before, they've had an incredibly stable level of support that's just about under the amount that they feel they need to achieve their ultimate goal in pursuing independence. They're always seemingly on its doorstep and never going through.
Yeah, that's the point too, right? Because it's if when it's all expectations management, right? Like when they're on the door of the majority level, and they've basically, when you're in a system that makes it so hard to get a majority, and you're on the door of a majority.
It is a mixed proportional system. The lists it's not perfectly proportional, but it is allocations based on who deserved seats based on their vote share, but hasn't been given them on constituencies yet.
Apparently, so Alba did. Apparently, someone in the chat saying Alba did very poorly in the list vote that got announced that in that Aberdeen seat, which was where they're supposed to do the best. So, so interesting. It's very interesting. Again, Alba will play into this. Other minor parties will play into this potentially as well. Just Labour strength, like SNP weakness in the list seats. Now, coming to their vote share here, we'll come back to what you think about majority here. They're at 47% of the constituency vote, which is up 1.3%. And then remember,
what actually looks like being the change, say, for Labour and Conservatives specifically? Like, is one of them doing better in particular or worse?
Yeah, I'll call
than
that
they
up
were
here.
in the last election.
So Lib Dems are down 0.6, Conservatives are down 0.6, Labour is down 0.9. So that's interesting that they're basically all just treading water.
So that's basically those figures you said.
Yes, those declared in Scotland, right? That's an important caveat to note because there are a lot of areas that are generally worse for the SNP that are yet to declare. However,
because the Conservative leader at the last election for Scotland, Ruth Davidson,
all right, so we're just.
Well, I was just going to make the point that the Conservative success at the last time around in Scotland was heralded. That was when they first became the opposition in Scotland. Their leader had some very good approval ratings that their new one doesn't in Scotland. So there's an interesting story there that if there's very little change between the unionist parties in Scotland, what are the major parties nationally? Despite both Labour and the Conservatives are having new Scottish leaders, despite or perhaps counteracted by the tactical voting that voters have become more aware of if they're on a pro-unionist side, but have different policies on the economy.
Mm-hmm. So one thing I will note here is that if you go to the polling average here, so this is polling average for the constituency vote. Now remember, hit the wrong button there. Remember, of course, that these are constituency votes and these are the polls. And remember that we are, if anything, the SNP vote is a little inflated at this point. Just a little inflated because they're getting the better areas for the SNP. But at this point, the polling average had the SNP just kind of going for since April 27th, so end of April, after that last debate. The SNP vote share was 49, 48, 51, 50, 42 in a Savanta Comres, 49 in a Servation, 52 in YouGov. That's the constituency vote for Scotland. Right now, they're on 47.0, and that may actually drop a little bit as we get more seats declared. So they're actually underperforming the constituency vote just a little bit because there's some seats that we're projecting them to lose, right? Like Aberdeenshire West, Galloway, and West Dumfries. And again, these are seats where there's definitely strategic. We're seeing strategic voting in other seats. We could definitely see those two seats hold, and then we might even see something like like Aberdeen South or Aberdeenshire East or Perthshire, right? Like one of those could flip, right? So generally, these are kind of some worse seats for the SNP. Now, let's look at the list seat opinion polling. So the list seat opinion polling is substantially worse for the SNP. Since that last debate, 37%, 39%, 41%, 39%, 34%, 36%, 38%. So if they're underperforming the constituency, it would tend to make sense that they're underperforming slightly on the list as well. So it's very possible they might get like 0 list seats. It's possible.
I would still expect them to pick some up in the south where the Conservatives are more able to take constituencies.
But that Ayr seat, though, that's the problem, right? See, I agree with you.
They gained 3 just from that region last time. It would be surprising if 3 dropped to 0.
Well, that's 2 gains, though, right? If you fall on the list seat and you pick up, right, because they picked up East Lothian, which is in the south, and the other one, right?
Okay, that's not actually included within, ironically, the Lothian region.
Yes, which is hilarious. But um, that's truly hilarious that East Lothian is not actually in Lothian. Um, but anyway,
Berwick's not in Berwickshire either. Boundaries in Scotland have changed
as you can see here, actually,
over time.
you guys can't see it particularly well. Um, because the uh, shouldn't have done shouldn't have clicked in onto that. So you guys can't see it amazingly well because of the box here for the thing here. But we'll move this down a little bit here. So let me just see here. Just drag that up just a little bit. And there we go. So this is Lothian right here, right? And you could see it better in our thing right here. So Lothian is a pickup, Ayr is a pickup. They won 3 list seats here in the south last time. Now we only have them on 1. If their list vote seat, and they were on the last one there in the south, if their list vote seat goes down, then suddenly we're now looking at the fact that they don't get any list vote seats in the south, and that their only chance at a list vote seat is in the Highlands. So it is a knife's edge. This is exciting. This is literally going to come down to like random people voting like list or constituency in random places. It's going to be great. We don't know. We won't know until tomorrow. It's going to depend on a lot of. It's going to come down to tomorrow, and it's a crazy result, and this is what election observers live for. So we'll see.
And there is, more on the line than just who's on in government. Is a fundamental question of what country you live in for those electors.
Well, the point you were making earlier is really important here, and it is lost a lot in the conversation of like, well, will the SNP get a majority? And to be honest, at some points it's functionally gamified. But the point of it, the matter is that if there's so many people in the country who vote SNP, right? If you're at 47% of the constituency vote, and pretty much in any country, that's more than enough to get you a majority. In Canada, surely. In the U.S., I think if you
In
got if Clinton got
in
47%
any
of the vote,
place that doesn't have a proportional system,
exactly.
that will tend to get you in government. In many other European democracies that have more proportional systems, that ends up with results like this. And by which case, the SNP is still remarkably successful. That they're so close to a majority, and then just have one minor coalition partner in the Greens. I should also just say for reference, so what the SNP got last time in pure percentage terms was 46, I don't know if you said this earlier, and a half percentage points at the constituency, and 41.7 on the list vote. So at present counting, I believe they're marginally up on that on the constituency, but not by enough to have flipped key seats.
And then down
and we'll
a
have
little
to
bit
see
in the
what happens on that list vote, or the same.
Yeah, that's the real thing, is how different is that list vote going to be? What's if they gain up on if they hold their list vote, they're great. But
I
if
did
they're
see someone ask about the Greens. We'll have to. The list vote will enlighten us about how the Greens are doing, in particular because that's the only election that they stand on, rather than constituencies, because they have a very spread out vote. But they do get support of a fair few percentages of Scotland's population, and they will be picking up list seats, and have been supporting the SNP in the Scottish Assembly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we'll have to see. I think it's it could be very interesting how this all turns out. Let's we will know tomorrow. I think some people are asking that may be it for Scotland today, which is hilarious that some of the most important ones are not going to be declared today, but that's usually as it is. These ones are pretty key marginal constituencies here in Aberdeen and stuff. Coming to
Do
Wales,
we
though,
not?
we only have a couple left, though. I think all of Wales is going to be declared today. We only got Pontypridd, Cardiff West, and Vale of Glamorgan. Vale of Glamorgan could be very close between the Labour and the Tories. We have it as a Tory pickup, so we'll go from there. Um, Oh, so we actually have. We have. Okay. So the we don't actually have list vote yet from Dumbarton. I thought I saw it on Twitter, but if the list vote is like, they're gonna be so close. So it's gonna be really close. We need to see more of the thing. BBC is only showing 38 out of 60 seats for Wales. Oh, so the reason they're showing that is because they haven't allocated the list seats yet. They're just they declare all the list seats once it's all done. So we'll come back here. So Labour's
Both.
on 39. Labour's at 40% of the vote in Wales. That's a lot higher than the poll said.
I was just going to say both. So the Scottish Parliament and Welsh Parliament, actually now as it is termed, were set up by when Labour were last in government in Westminster in the late 90s, and I do believe like it was a deliberate intent that they designed the system with the slightly more proportional lean in their eyes, because they thought that would help Labour stay in power in various areas of the country for longer, which has worked remarkably well in Wales and working well, better than we thought tonight. Didn't work for as long as they'd hoped in Scotland, but those both use the same electoral system in these specific elections for the devolved powers. But it's as a deliberate choice by when they were set up by the Labour government back in 97 or so. And they're the only places that have that exact system.
Mm-hmm. We have another. We do have another declaration from London here. Northeast 2011. So we have. Sorry, 2021. So 2016, Con won the Northeast London constituency, 136,000 to 40,000. Today it is 111,000 to 44,000. So that's a chunk out of it. So that's unfortunate. However, though, not a death blow. It's a pain. It's a headache. There's problems, but definitely still not a death blow. The conservative strength in London is definitely being overblown. They're not going to win it. But it's not enough. They needed more. They need to come a lot closer in a lot of those constituencies. So probably London is definitely going to still hold Labour. Interestingly enough, though, I'd love to. I mean, I don't think we're getting it today. Love to have gotten it today, though. If we got West Midlands, I'd love to see the sheer of it, because that one looks a lot more similar to those kind of northeastern seats than anything in London. So I think that's kind of a very interesting piece that I'd love to see going forward is what happens in some of those northeastern constituencies in the West Midlands. If I believe it's Andy Street, if he can do anything or not. So let's see. Any updates on some district councils? No, we're still missing some of them. Someone's talking about Drakeford. That's is Drakeford's a constituency, right? Or no, it's a district, right?
I believe that's a district council. I'm not immediately certain where. My guess is in the northwest.
Drakeford is the Welsh premier.
Oh wait, Mark Drakeford. I was in the person. Then yes, he's the. I thought we were talking about some valley with the Labour council. No, yeah, Mark Drakeford is the leader of Welsh Labour. Is someone asked a specific question relating to him? Oh yeah, does he get an absolute majority?
I think he still comes up short, because the majority is
30. And Wales is, for some reason, and maybe you know something interesting about this, but for some reason Wales just has fewer list seats. They decided to make the Welsh Parliament less proportional. So I think we only had Labour picking up one list seat in Wales, and it is really quite difficult for them to get more than one.
Yeah, so they had 20 they need 30 sorry, it's 31 list seats. Right now they are on 24. Technically even, but it's hiding losses. So like there's a path to 27 and then the one list seat. Honestly, it's probably closer to Vale of Glamorgan they probably lose Vale of Glamorgan. So they're probably going to be at 26 and then at that point then it's just a slog to get up the extra list seat, right? So
The big That's the big thing to watch in the lists is that we were quite confident about Abolish in Wales because they were polling just over the threshold you need to get one list seat in all 5 Welsh regions. If that doesn't pan out, like if we're getting early indications that Alba is doing shitty, which is our other minor party that it's tough to call whether they're seated or not. If Abolish misses those list seats, they could be available for Labour. That's something I can go run that for Wales as well. I can see
So,
who our fifth and sixth are.
do we have Cardiff West or Vale of Glamorgan declared, or anyone has said that they've got them there?
it's not on the BBC. I'll refresh here, but I don't think we have them. Oh, we do. We have Pontypridd, not Cardiff West though. Pontypridd, Labour up 2, Plaid up 4, Conservatives up 5. I think that's a UKIP drop. So they won that by about 19 points. We had that as about 25, 15-point win. So that's about right. So Labour, we thought they were going to lose a couple points. They gained a couple points. So that's actually very good for them. I still think they're off from a majority level, though. They're at 25 now. I think they need 6. So I don't think they're going to get that, though. But could be interesting, though.
Right. I have just run our seat calculations for fifth and sixth, and the only opportunity for Labour in the lists looks to be in North Wales, where we have them in fifth.
And we have the Lib Dems as getting one of them too. And if Lib Dems have completely collapsed, which appears possible, then that could be a list seat for them as well. So
yeah, this is actually incredibly rough because we have the Lib Dems being in fifth place in 3 of the 5 regions right now.
I'd assume without the Lib Dems getting Brecon and Radnorshire, where you had them taking the constituency, that might make them more viable on the list seat for the central Welsh list region, and would have been their best hope, I'd have thought.
Yeah, that's true. How many constituency votes are left for Wales? Just 2. Just Cardiff West and Vale of Glamorgan. So just the 2 left in Wales, and then they'll declare Wales. They said they were going to declare all of Wales today. Scotland, again, a lot more rural, right? So I assume they have some sort of, because most of the ones we're waiting on are more rural, except for literally some of these Highland ones, which I think are just kind of, they're so big that they just have, everybody's within one small area, so they just have their own counting place for it. But the other ones we're looking at, like the Aberdeen ones, they're more rural. Down here in the south, these ones are also a bit more rural too. Some Glasgow ones, I just don't think they
at the same time, some of the ballot boxes in the islands had to get on airplanes. So some of those counting stations for the outer islands had to get on airplanes and ferries. So I don't really know what's causing the variation across the Scottish Highlands and Islands of which counts quicker or not. But
maybe
I think just how much of a drill the return agent is can sometimes make all the difference.
Yeah, maybe they're just better at it. They're just better at counting. We have results.
I mean, Newcastle and Sunderland announced within an hour because they have a remarkably factory-like efficient way of doing it, whereas everyone else prefers to take an afternoon.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so so what we've got here is we've got Northeast Mayor. Sadiq Khan has an 8.1% swing against him in the Northeast. Now, this is actually a pretty key Labour constituency. When you're looking here, it doesn't include Chingford and Woodford Green. So that's not including them. And then there's this significant batch right here, this should be like strong Labour turf. They usually get like 60 some odd percent in a lot of these seats in general elections. And uh, they're not. They are not getting that at all. So this is concerning. If you're Labour, I think you should be a little concerned about. You should start getting a little concerned about some of these London results, and figuring out why you're. Is it? It could be hatred of Sadiq. Sadiq apparently is somewhat controversial in London for some reasons. So we'll have to see. But again, if you're London, if you're a Labour member in London, I think you're not sleeping easy. I think you have a lot of questions that you're going to have to ask and answer in the coming days. So, um, what do you think what do you think about why they might be having these problems in London? Do you think it's a Sadiq problem that people are not the biggest fan of Sadiq Khan? What do you think, Jason?
I don't think it's anything particular with Sadiq. I mean,
Just
he
general
seems
labor
he
weakness.
seems to be honestly not that far from. I don't mean to be harsh to him, but generic Labour candidate. I don't think he necessarily over or underperforms on his own reputation. And he's not that far aligned from what Labour voters in London would want. But I think what is telling is, the votes that go to independents. I think the best performing independent is a YouTuber who's attempted to, use social media to go viral and appeal to, as found a demographic in London is probably the best city to do that kind of campaign. And that probably just speaks to an apathy or at least a lack of enthusiasm that Labour has been able to get behind its campaign for Sadiq. Perhaps he's not offering enough of to them there. Perhaps it was just assuming that there wasn't much, or there weren't many high stakes. Nico Omilano, I do believe, has ran a YouTube-based campaign and is getting 20,000 votes thus far, followed by a right-wing reactionary, which probably isn't taking votes from Labour, but he's run an opposite campaign through more traditional media, have decided to give him way too many interviews. I think then it's a podcaster, and then I've no idea, and then there is, again, a joke candidate that's become big on Twitter. But also probably appealing to left-wing people that want to make a joke out of an election that they don't think matters or that they thought was all tied up. And, that I think mostly just reflects on how Labour ran that campaign. It's probably an easier problem to fix for them than in other places where they've got concerns about, voters fundamentally thinking that they don't, or that a different party represents them. This is just voters feeling that, or potentially if it's just voters feeling that the stakes aren't as high, and that this one doesn't matter as much, or that maybe even if it's, you're not offering me enough here as the mayor of London, whose, powers are still somewhat limited for as much media attention. Those are problems that they should be able to fix more easily than some of the other ones that they've encountered. But I think those are the problems that it probably is, rather than the Conservatives are, suddenly making inroads. I mean, well, I guess I haven't critically thought about where has the Conservative vote come from as much. I mean, 35% in London doesn't sound that bad for Conservatives. It's just, Labour hasn't been as strong as it could be.
Oh,
and props should be.
Sir John Curtis agrees with us. When he agrees with us on Dumbarton, we can rest the clip here.
Pathway to an overall majority.
He says that.
Let's be quite clear, John. Do you think there is a pathway
the
to
most probable outcome of the
victory,
SNP is going to be one or two seats
SNP
short.
there, or is it
Believes
more likely
Labour's
to be
hold in
SNP
Dumbarton
plus
seat makes
Green?
SNP majority
Well, there still
unlikely.
is a pathway to an overall majority, Kirsty, but it's a very, very narrow one. There are a couple of constituencies left. Conservative-held constituencies, Galloway and Aberdeenshire West, that SNP might just pick up, but to be honest, on the basis of the results so far, we think it's less than likely. And then they might just pick up a list seat in the Highlands and Islands. And if all of that happened, that might still take them to 65. But I think, as Andrew Wilson is beginning to acknowledge, it's now the most probable outcome is indeed that the SNP is going to be one or two seats short And we are therefore looking at an SNP Green majority for a referendum rather than the SNP on their own. I think two things might flow from that. First is that the UK government will feel more emboldened to say no to the request that is bound to happen at some point from the new Parliament. But secondly, it may actually speed up the constitutional clash. One suspects that some people inside the SNP will regard this as a disappointment. And some of them at least will argue that one reason for this is that Ms Sturgeon has not been pursuing the independence project and the independence referendum strongly enough. So Ms Sturgeon, I think, is going to be in a weaker position vis-à-vis her party, and that will give her less room for manoeuvre in terms of trying to play the timing of the referendum or the referendum request long rather than short. So Ms Sturgeon, because she's in a weaker position, might now want to push for the referendum rather more strongly. But at the same time, Boris Johnson may now feel somewhat more emboldened to try and put her off.
All right, so there's that then. So he believes, and John Curtis, again, is one of the best at this. It appears as though it's all going to come down to Aberdeenshire West, which we will not know until tomorrow. The model has it as a likely Conservative hold by 7 points. Actually, sorry, 13 points, sorry. Conservatives have come close in some targets near there. They haven't been able to pull it off. But yeah, it's going to be close. This is the knife's edge. If the SNP don't win Aberdeenshire West, they're probably not getting a majority. And then again,
What did you say the model suggested was the margin?
13% Conservative win in Aberdeenshire West.
That's for a one seat that it all comes down to is not as close as they would like. I think that sounds a bit clutching at straws for them if this is the last chance to get that absolute or pure majority on their own.
But to be fair, though, that's about a 10-point swing. So that means the Conservatives are up 4.9, SNP are down 5 from last time. So theoretically, if you're looking at it and you're saying, okay, well then let's ignore it because we haven't seen a lot of the swings that we've wanted to see. So for example, let's look at probably the next closest scene, which would be Angus North. So let's take a look at Angus North. Let's see what happened in the SNP hold. We thought the Conservatives would gain this seat. It didn't happen. Conservatives only gained 1 point. Conservatives, the SNP gained 2.9. So the gains that we thought were going to happen. So coming back over here for a second here. We thought the SNP was going to lose 5 points. We thought the Conservatives were going to gain 5 points. Conservatives gained 1 point. The SNP gained 2 points. If that happens, it's still a Conservative hold. So this seat. The thing is that when you look at
difference?
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to ask what would be the difference then again to your model and the result in Moray, which is also a bordering constituency.
Yes, let's go to Moray for a second here. But one thing I do want to point out before we do go to Moray quickly is that even then you saw a shift away from Labour and Labour and Lib Dems in Angus North. So we saw a shift away from them. Again, it's looking like there is strategic voting happening here today. Well, whatever. It's tonight for you guys. Tonight. Let's go to Moray. And let's see what the swing we saw in Moray. Again, these are the two seats that border and probably the closest realistically to that seat. And again, we're seeing that Conservative up, SNP up 1, Conservatives up 2. Very minor swing against Labour and the Lib Dems. There is a swing of 4 points against them. So basically, SNP are even, Conservatives are up a small amount. Anything similar to that would happen. We need a major shift against the Conservatives for them to pick up Aberdeenshire West. That's just not happening. The other thing to note is that in seats like Angus North, someone's saying another seat came in. Another seat in Scotland. I don't think another seat came in Scotland. No, I don't think so. Maybe. The S&P's at 38 now, but either way, with the S&P here at the other thing is when you're looking at seats like Angus North and Moray, these are much more these are two team races. These are basically two party races. Aberdeenshire West, Lib Dems have 15%. They actually have 20% of the vote in Aberdeenshire West. So there's room for a strategic vote. If you're a strategic Lib Dem voter and you say, okay, I don't want the SNP to win this seat, I'm going to vote Conservative, at least on the constituency level. There's a much larger base for a strategic vote. Coming over here again, even Aberdeen South. So this is one we don't actually have, and this could actually be a spot of. This is actually a spot of problems for the. This could potentially be a spot of problem for the SNP here, because as we saw here earlier, there is a base of Labour. Like Labour got 18% of the vote here in 2019, in 2016. Sorry. In other seats that we saw here, there wasn't really a third party. It was just kind of a top two party. Aberdeen South, if there's some Labour strategic voters, this could get closer. Same here. Angus South is a bit more two party, so that's fine. And so is Perthshire South. But what we're seeing is the strategic voting. And if this is the strategic voting we're seeing, then yeah, we might not this might not be over. They could lose some other seats here in the West, which would actually give them some list votes, but then they'd just be spinning their wheels. So so it's interesting. We're not done here yet. A minority looks likely. It seems like that's the most likely outcome, as John Curtis says. We are agreeing with John Curtis, obviously. And that's kind of what we had said as well. So we're gonna go from there. Let's see. Do we have anything more from Wales? Nothing new from Wales yet. No. Let's see if we have anything from the locals. Let's see if we have anything new on Twitter. Anything you want to point out?
I've not looked at English locals in a little while.
I haven't seen anything particularly stand out as new to me here.
I mean, there are some, towns as well where the Conservatives are making gains. Towns like Swindon is in the southwest, but a place that Labour have been gradually receding. It used to be split MPs in the two constituencies there, and it's one that, although in the southwest, has a similar make-out to some of the seats where Labour has been losing. So there are a few other results that are good for the Conservatives that are coming through there. I'm trying to find if there are any particular constituencies where you might have thought, can Labour expand out of a particular town in that county?
Yeah. I'm not sure yet. It's going to be interesting to see. I think
I'm just sort of cherry picking a few councils to then look at them in detail to see what changes happen. Solihull in the West Midlands is a place where the Greens have steadily been the insurgent force that's picking off seats from the Conservatives. They're probably similar to how they've done to Labour in the North, but they're perhaps different to their national picture, which is often quite left-wing. They are, finding ways to just talk about conservationism, which appeals to many more right-wing voters a lot of the time, but is entirely fitting within their message, and they're finding bits of success in making themselves an opposition force.
Mm-hmm. And it
is actually worth noting overall. It is a good night for the Greens. They have admittedly just the one seat parliamentarily. They are sort of desperately hoping to find somewhere to break through again, which hasn't been available for them at the highest levels. But they have made steady and consistent progress with people willing to give them a chance in their area.
So this is actually interesting. So we actually have Bury Metropolitan. This is in the Greater Manchester area. We thought Labour would lose this. And it turns out they've actually only lost. They lost just enough. They have just over a majority. So this is going to be another loss. This is one of the few losses tonight on the local authority model. We had this as a lean NOC pickup. It's turning out to be a Labour hold. So again, a rare loss for us. But again, though, it's interesting that again, when you look at a lot of these constituencies and these wards, on the surface, a lot of them look very similar to these northeastern ones. And this is what we saw last night, right? Like we were like, this is horrible. The Northeast is so gone. Labour is screwed. But now we're coming down into the greater Liverpool, Manchester, Leeds area, and it's not as bad. it is not as bad. We're not seeing
Yeah.
these massive 25-point swings in some of these wards. So it's going to be really
Looking-
interesting to when we start. We'll peel off some of these results later on and look at exactly who won these wards and who didn't. But in a lot of these cases, this is not the worst. I mean, it's obviously sucks to lose, and there's still more ground to lose in the Northeast. But in Doncaster could have been a lot worse. So what do you? Yep, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so in Greater Manchester in particular is some of the areas that's probably got the best signs for Labour. Like in Wigan is a place where they've, as you know, they do have the seat there. But in Bury they've lost parliamentary seats, and they're doing better than thought. Especially if you then look at the south side of Greater Manchester, this is probably the more affluent side, and if we're talking about realignment and where are newer opportunities, this is where there have been more Conservative seats within that city previously. And within the borough of Trafford specifically, Labour have made gains within Greater Manchester.
Mm-hmm.
They've gained 3 seats seemingly directly off the Tories, although there's also a change between the Lib Dems and the Greens. So there's probably a few things going in different directions. But that is a place where, Labour have made progress. They've made progress in a place where previously was their weakest borough, and although even if there are some cracks in northern parts of that city, like the northeast, or might be more working class, there are places that they have been able to win here, and this is probably also a place where they can take lessons to apply to London, because they probably the attitude of the campaign in Greater Manchester has potentially been very different with all the boroughs up. And with the mayoralty going on at the same time, I don't think you would find much up to justify that there was any sort of complacency or any attitude from voters that the stakes weren't high enough to vote Labour rather than for what you wanted otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
But within the Greater Manchester, where there are viable seats that the Conservatives hold in this area, the couple as well that have faced the Liberal Democrats, there are some good signs, certainly better than everywhere else, and actual progress within some of the boroughs, which does relate to, there's a target parliamentary constituency there. It's probably 1, maybe 2 in places, and a few where they'd lost them and maybe have better chances of recovering than they might have done, and certainly but now that they would hope to do. But that is a place of, I'd say, relative Labour success on this election.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it definitely has been. So, and again, there's there's some councils here that went NOC. So, I think the thing for Labour is they've really got to, could it have to deal with these areas having more minorities than the industrial north? That's part of it. There is a little bit higher of a minority population, not substantially. It's looking like an SNP Green coalition, a Labour Plaid coalition, yes. Except Plaid's going to have a lot less power. So, but yeah, no. The thing.
I should say also.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. I was just going to say, in terms of minority population areas, generally speaking, where that is true, those places have bigger Labour support. But there is also Liverpool, especially, probably looks the most like the northeast of any of these places within, the northwest, and yet has a very deep Labour-rooted identity that is probably more resistant to change than anything else. There are some communities that look, very much like, raised next to the dockyards as much as they would have been in Newcastle or as they were in Liverpool.
Mm-hmm.
But that's an area that has a history of being a target of punitive, quite literally, Conservative policies under Margaret Thatcher that's been recorded and talked about and known within that area. That the government was against them, as well as scandals that got covered up relating to the Hillsborough disaster as a tragedy where lots of football fans died in a stadium accident, which then resulted in cover-ups and denials and accusations that actually the people there were accused and had a very long road to justice. So there is a deep-rooted identity within that city and that area that the Conservatives do not represent them in any way, and they are probably, although the population can look and have a very similar makeup and work background to other areas, it has probably one of the stronger resistances to realignments and actual political histories that make it it has huge Labour majorities, and I don't imagine that they're going to move at least for quite a this generation at least.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is an interesting take on it, and to see where that will go. I think we're gonna have to see. So, still nothing new in Wales today. Nothing new in Wales yet. We're still waiting on those 2 seats. No, who knows when those will go. Nothing in Scotland. We're still waiting on some London results. I think we could probably safely call London pretty safely call it for Sadiq. At least he will probably pull that out. I'd be very surprised if he did in fact lose that. But yet again, we'll see. I don't think he will. I think in that case we've been streaming for a couple hours here. I think if we're not getting any more results today, I think we might kind of call it a day, I guess. I'll kind of go to you first, Alex. Any thoughts on what we're seeing here today?
Not really. It's just been I've been most interested in the devolved parliaments because I got to put together our final list seat forecasts. So I've been really curious to see how those hold up, and I love that Scotland's majority has come down to the knife edge, and we won't know anything for another day. That's more exciting than I was hoping for. I actually was of the impression that using MMP meant that your election results were boring to follow. So I'm really glad to have been disabused of that notion.
Well, that's the thing, right? Because this isn't just pure MMP. There's also the list vote too, right? So, yeah, with the constituency vote, right? If it wasn't for constituency vote, it'd be pretty boring. But there is that constituency vote, right? So that's the issue. So we're gonna have to see. It could be interesting. I mean, here's the SNP. Like we have Alba getting a couple seats, right? If Alba doesn't get those seats, who else are going to get those seats, right? Could be Labour. Labour seems pretty strong. Could be the Tories, right? And if not them, then could one of those seats fall to the SNP? It's going to be hard. It is going to be really hard. But I mean, it's going to be interesting. Let's see what happens with these list seats. It's going to be really interesting tomorrow. I fully expect it to be a minority. It's going to be so agonizingly close. It's going to be so close, so agonizingly close. But you can only imagine a Canadian election that would look like this. Could you imagine a Canadian election that would look like this? This would be amazing. The like Alberta or like the Calgary list seats. That'd be.
I mean, Alberta would be pretty boring, but.
Or like Toronto list seats. It'd be like a bunch of conservative list seats and then some NDP. It'd be a very interesting election. Or like rural Quebec list seats. Who gets those? That could be some very interesting stuff happening there. Jason, I think before we head out for the day, what are your thoughts? Obviously, do you think was this what you expected, or is this anything here that you're seeing today a surprise?
I think my answer to surprise is the same as what I said quite a while ago. Now is that Labour in Wales is still pretty okay, and if not doing better, and that's their best story of the night of the day now. Coming night again, actually for UK on Friday.
Well, did you expect Labour to do worse in Wales? Did you expect them to do worse?
I was broadly expecting. Actually, when was it was last up in 2016 in Wales?
Yes.
So honestly, I probably would have been expecting them to do worse there. I think the Conservatives have made such gains nationally since then, and they've broadened their coalition. And a lot of what we've seen across England is just the realignment the Conservatives had already achieved to an extent, which I think we had been expecting, coming to fruition on a local level. But it's also revealed, I think, still some regional discrepancies on where that is happening quickest, and where I think that there's some optimism on Labour if their strategy is just to resist it or reverse it. They're showing that they can resist it a bit in Manchester, and they are showing that with opportunity and devolved government, they're reversing in places in Wales. So that's, I guess it makes it hard to know what Labour's strategy immediately becomes now. I wonder whether the results that came in first led to more damning headlines than perhaps they deserved. And especially with the reflection that, you know, some of these were last contested in 2016, some of them last in 2017, and even then the by-election in Hartlepool, to compare that with, you know, almost quite lucky that Labour held it in 2019 because of the Brexit Party vote. There's a negative spin that might have got out that's harsher than it necessarily should be based on what we could expect, but there's, at the same time, you know, they're still very much in opposition by some distance, and we've not seen enough sort of counties in the south with, you know, towns that are perhaps getting, you know, well-educated graduates moving out to them to start families, whether they're starting to pick up Labour votes or not. But there's only the slightest hints of areas where Labour could win in future that they haven't done, in the way that the Canadian Liberals have expanded out of Toronto Metro, or the Democrats have expanded outside of Philadelphia. And if Labour truly want a strategy that changes their coalition, they need to, you know, get more serious on that. And we had a long conversation about what role that has in their relationship with the Lib Dems. But it's, I mean, overall, despite having talked at length, it almost feels like a bizarre level of stasis for British politics in a way. None more surmised by what's happening in Scotland, which is, yeah, the biggest question in British politics seems to remain decisively unresolved.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's a correct sentiment. I think although a lot seems to have changed, not a lot has actually changed, I think. I think just looking at here now, like, I think the problem that I think Labour is at a crossroads, right? I think a lot of people viewed success, especially last night, as competitive hold Hartlepool, right? It's not even a pickup, it's hold Hartlepool, and don't suffer massive losses in the locals. Be like, okay, 2019 was an aberration, it's never happening again. That didn't happen in the Northeast. Now remember, the Northeast is one of the first ones to declare, so we had a lot of those results as of last night. However, now that we're starting to see kind of the broader Greater Liverpool, Greater Manchester, it doesn't look so bad. It doesn't look bad. And I think that's the issue with. I think that's the issue with the. I mean, one, it's the issue with the way the results were stacked, right? The results came out first from the Northeast, and that's the thing. But Labour needs to define what success is. Is it success is getting those red wall voters back? Is that success? Or is getting success winning these southeastern seats that are clearly vulnerable? Like, Lib Dems are picking up these seats, and Labour is barely able to contest them, right? Like, what's the difference
for them ultimately is returning to government.
But what's the path to get there, though? Right? Like, that's the thing.
They know what success is, but they don't know what the strategy is for that. And I think this has left them still uncertain, because if their strategy is just recover what we lost, that still just doesn't seem particularly viable. Or it's, you know, there are places where they're falling further behind, even if in other places it's better. It does seem to say that they need to find new ground, and on that measure of success, I guess being able to answer the question of what's the best strategy is progress, but there is, you know, ultimately a time limit for them to do this. They don't want the Conservatives to be winning another general election. They've got to. They couldn't. If in a year's time they're facing more local elections that look like this, then that's definitely failure. If this is the first local election that Labour face, trying to recover from some bad, you know, national election results, they've still got a bit of time, I guess.
Well, the thing is, there is a lot of seats, local seats specifically, that are not up today. However, a lot more local seats are up next time, because the one year that was kind of overlaid was kind of a bye year, if that makes sense. Like, there's a lot of seats that aren't up, but like next time you have all of London. So, like, if you don't start making gains in London, that's a problem. pretty much all of the borough councils, usually they're only up for 3 years, then off one of the years. The one off year has been eaten up, and then now you've got a fresh batch of seats to defend in the Northeast, in the Metropolitan Borough Council. So you've got a fresh batch of seats to defend in the Liverpool, Manchester area. You're going to have all the 1/3 ones are up. So you've got a lot of different councils that are going to be up. There's a lot more locals to come up next time. So there's going to be a lot of seats, and the question is, where can Labour make those gains? And the answer, if Keir Starmer can't find those gains, I kind of don't think that he will be a leader after next time. I kind of think that if he can't find a way to at least make these somewhat competitive, I don't think he's going to be leader for the next general election. I think he'll get another local elections. And again, we're talking about an election in the one seat that there's going to be some UK by-elections in a couple weeks for the ones for the ones in the UK. There's going to be the one in there's going to be one in Yorkshire, because the one who's likely to win the mayor of West Yorkshire. And again, I'm not seeing anything that's going to dispel that, but we don't actually have any results from that area. So West Yorkshire will probably be a bit closer, but there'll be a by-election up in her seat, and then there's going to be one down here in Chelmsford in the south. I kind of think, even if he does badly in those by-elections, he'll move on, but the issue will be next year. Will he survive till next year? And if we get another local election like this, where they're staring at like 20-point losses in some of those seats in the north, and there isn't gains in the south, I am very confident that he won't be Labour leader going into the next set of local elections in 2023. So, do you agree with that sentiment, or do you think that's maybe a bit extreme?
I think on the question of leadership, Labour doesn't have a very good record of knowing when to ditch and change, in a sense that the Tories do. And that's why I don't entirely agree with it. Not that to say it would be warranted in order to change direction, but the Conservatives are very good at thinking it's not going well, let's change something. They just deposed Theresa May quite ruthlessly while she was Prime Minister because things were going badly, and it solved their problems. And the Conservative membership and the power base within that are quite happy, and their MPs are quite happy to do that if they think it's electorally sensible. Leadership changes within Labour become quite ugly factional fights. Jeremy Corbyn did face a challenge that he saw off, and it arguably the infighting that was continuous throughout his tenure about whether or not he was the right person to lead Labour, because he did see some good results, and he saw quite a lot of bad results at local elections as well. Probably didn't add to a narrative that ultimately helped them anyway. So my only reason for disagreement is on whether or not there is the political will internally of Labour to actually make that decision and depose the leader and think that this isn't working, we need someone else, because that takes something that Labour has not necessarily shown themselves ruthless enough internally to do.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a good
There'll
point.
certainly be calls for it if there's not success, but that doesn't mean that the faction that calls for it is going to succeed.
Well, I think if there's problems in the by-election, I think then those voices are going to get very, very loud. I think if there's going to be calls for it now, and I think there's going to, if they still can't win those by-elections, or have they really struggled in those by-elections, there will be calls for Starmer's head. Do you think that Starmer is the right leader, though? I mean, just fundamentally, and I think we'll ask this question and we'll go around. First of all, I'll go to Alex on this. Do you think Keir Starmer is the right leader to unite this kind of extremely divided Labour Party? Do you think he actually has the ability to win a general election, Alex?
The only thing I know about Keir Starmer, apparently he's an atheist, so that's neat.
Well, I think that's kind of the problem.
I've no idea on that, but honestly, I think it gets talked about a lot less in UK politics than anywhere else. I wouldn't have even known that before you said it.
Oh no, yeah, I'm sure it wasn't like a big domestic. I'm sure it wasn't a big domestic issue. It just came out. I think he mentioned there aren't very many parliamentary leaders in the world who confirm that they're irreligious. So I'm aware that this is an unusual thing to say like because it came out long after he was selected as leader. But like having an average, boring guy in charge, it doesn't look like it's doing that much so far. But there really haven't been that many big political upheavals in the pandemic era for almost anyone, I would say. Like all of the Canadian elections we've covered in the past year have been relatively boring. Like insurgent forces don't have the same opportunity to prove themselves. Like most people are like, well, a great number of people are stuck at home. It's just like there's less opportunity for sweeping changes to occur. So like does it come down to Starmer's person? Like I think a lot of the stasis we see these last couple of days, a lot of it just comes down to living in a global crisis. I'm not sure if any other leader would really have any better opportunity to prove themselves.
I think in terms of leadership, if you compare to like who the other leadership candidates were, if it was, the left faction's candidate Rebecca Long Bailey got through, honestly, my view would be that would be not going any better. I feel it's hard to overstate how the effect and the view that the electorate ended up having of Jeremy Corbyn and his leadership ended up accelerating trends in areas that lost Labour votes. Whether or not they could, be stalled or not, it didn't help them, and it also didn't help them get tactical voting either, because he was seen as anathema to liberal-minded voters as well. In that leadership election itself, I would probably have thought that the best candidate from my perspective was someone like Lisa Nandy, who was a very good communicator, but I don't know if my view on who appealed to me the most is then applicable to the rest of the UK. There doesn't seem to be screaming out options for Labour, because ultimately they do find themselves in a difficult position. It's not easy to jump back quite so quickly, and I guess Starmer's supporters say that, well, at least it is a sigh of relief that we're not generating as much direct hatred from the leader, where they're disliked more than the party and bring them down. People not having an opinion on him could even be a positive in that regard. But I think, whether he's the right leader does also require the conversation of who are alternatives within Labour's higher ranking people. And I mean, it feels hard to make an obvious case that someone could immediately change it. In fact, I guess the best way to example that is looking at Scotland, where we've had two leadership changes, quite a recent change for the leadership of Labour in Scotland, where they replaced a guy who was literally English as their Scottish leader with a guy who grew up in Glasgow, and has been given good responses in terms of how well he did in debates and brought more energy to it. Perhaps the amount of change that they as a leader themselves can do is a bit overblown. But the strategy that they employ, I think Keir Starmer himself is quite malleable. He was perceived as being a lot more liberal-leaning, Europhile as a cabinet member under Starmer than he has been a leader of Labour, because he doesn't think that those are the voters he needs to work hardest for. Whether he's able to make his own strategy change in response to that will probably be the most telling or not of whether he's the right leader at this time, about those decisions he makes behind closed doors rather than just how he presents on TV.
Yeah, and I think that just raises a good question of like, okay, fine, if you're like Starmer sucks, he shouldn't be leader. Who should be leader? Right, Andy Burnham in Greater Manchester? I mean, maybe that's not the worst idea. Like,
he would need to return to Westminster really for that.
That could be arranged.
It can be arranged. He's probably someone that's waiting his time. I mean, he's run in 2 leadership elections before and not made it. Most notably starting as the favourite and losing to Jeremy Corbyn. He's probably going to be re-elected as Manchester mayor and have a good reputation for his future career. But I doubt he's an immediate replacement.
That's fair. It could be interesting, though. I mean, we'll see. I don't know. Maybe at this point we estimate that there are some calls for Starmer to go, but not the strongest or loudest voices. Maybe there's still some hope that he can survive. So, Rebecca,
there has always been calls from the left of the party that deeply supported Jeremy Corbyn and wanted their party to remain in faction, have Rebecca Long Bailey win, have consistently resisted Keir Starmer, and because they don't believe that he is going to lead to success. They believe there is a fundamentally different approach, and they are going to continue to pursue that. It's whether or not they can do what they did in 2015, which is convince the wide majority of the Labour membership that what they need to do is re-energise, and only a true left figure could do that. But that's just a question of internal party politics. And didn't succeed for Jeremy Corbyn in the long run, although there's much to be said of 2017.
Someone's just asking, and we'll do a couple questions here before we head out for the day. Why are left-wing parties, Liberal NDP, so successful in Canada compared to most other Western countries like the UK? The reason is that in Canada, it's so suburban and urban. Because Canada is such a large country, most people are actually very clustered together in a couple of areas. I think over 60% of Canada lives within the U.S. border, within like 40 kilometers of the U.S. border. So, and the whole point of saying that is that and that's not to say that everybody is like close to the U.S. It's just to say that there's only so much distance you can go up from it, and if everybody's living within that small distance, then it's actually we're barely using any of our country's size. So because it's so suburban and urban and so well educated, like Canada has one of the highest university degree rates in the entire world. So because of that, the left-leaning parties, they gain their strength from that. In the UK, you have all of these kind of white working class areas, Hartlepool, the entire northeast. That was where shipbuilding industry, right? That was shipbuilding industry. The entirety of the north was basically heavy industry. They were the ones who built a lot of the cars. Like the auto industry was there. And you look at these rural areas that had these industries that have gone now. Those are the ones that have been hit the most by globalization. Those are voting conservative now. The problem is the fact that in Canada, and to a lesser extent the U.S., but specifically in Canada, the liberals and New Democrats have pretty much squeezed out all of the. They haven't done it completely yet. There's still some areas that they can still take on, but they functionally squeezed out all the juice from the suburbs, right? Still a couple more kind of rural suburbs that are growing, and the Liberals and the NDP are slowly picking those off. But in the UK, Labour has nowhere near the amount of support they need to start picking off suburbs in Surrey and stuff in around London. Like the areas that Labour and the areas that the Liberals and the NDP take for granted during elections, those areas in the UK are still voting Conservative. And the thing is, because that fundamental shift hasn't happened yet, that's the problem. That's why we still aren't seeing. That's why we're still not seeing the strength that. We're still seeing the Liberals and the NDP doing a lot better in Canada.
I think it's also just worth saying how the populations of these countries are ultimately different. I don't know what the rate is in Canada, but the UK is about 90% white. That's going to be, and ethnic minorities within the UK do support Labour more, but it's not the same as the demographics within the US by any means, and the political history is different. There are these older white working class industrial areas. Their demographics has also changed because university rates have been going up quite a lot, probably similar to Canada's. And many of those people that go to university have left places like Hartlepool and have gone to London, where they now vote Labour. And places like Hartlepool are a lot older than they were 20 years ago. They've been losing young people going to university and not going back. And just UK as a country, it is much more densely populated than Canada or America. And even then, compared to France or Germany, it has lots of what is densely populated rural areas where there are just lots of small towns a mile apart from each other with a few farms between them, which has been a stronghold of Conservative support for a century or more, since the last big British political realignment. It's I don't know if it would be like whether southern Ontario was quadrupled in size and you had that many more Conservative seats, probably not at that ratio, but there's a lot of those areas within the UK, whereas you've got London as a major city, perhaps compared to somewhere like Toronto, but then the difference between London and Vancouver, or London and Manchester and Birmingham, is probably bigger in the size disparity than between the major cities in Canada, and certainly there aren't as many major cities that create these centres of Labour support compared to what we see across the Atlantic. So there are, just more challenges because the population is different.
Yeah, what surprises me about the UK is that I think London is culturally as much a primate city as Toronto. I mean, probably it's more of a primate city because Toronto ain't got shit. I'm sorry, I don't live there. But by population, London just does not have that big a share of the national population compared to Toronto. Like, if you win Toronto and the greater region, then you control a quarter of the Canadian House of Commons. But London only adds up to like 1/8 or 1/9. So, and it's what you said. It's because the rural areas and the regional cities are just so much more dense populated. I think, and that also means that our percentage, our share of immigrants, I believe, is about twice as high as yours, and it's the same thing. It's because our primate city is more primary, and there's just not as much in the rest of the country to offset it. So Jason, I came up with a question you here because you'll know much more about the English national character than I do. Here, so Labour is really tough. Like, they're up against some really bad fundamentals. Here in Canada, we say, the Conservatives are up against really bad fundamentals. Like, the Conservatives have such a hard time overcoming their disadvantages in our heavily diverse suburbs. So our successful Conservatives have tended to be successful by like playing really offensively and coming and aggressively targeting like areas that should be really strong for Liberals. So Doug Ford and Stephen Harper both performed really, really well among minorities in our diverse suburbs, which are supposed to be like the deepest core of Liberal strength. And so that's the path. That's the difficult and unlikely path to victory here in Canada. So flipping it around and looking at what Labour is up against, and how their only hope is like this is the Remainy South, where they are still doing really badly and they're not showing signs of breaking through at all yet. What do you think a victorious strategy for them would look like? Like, what super aggressive thing could they do to come right for like areas that are supposed to be really strong for the Conservatives and put together their next majority coalition? Like, is that even imaginable?
I mean, solve the problems of the Labour Party in one tweet is probably something that gets done an awful lot. But I mean, success for the Labour Party could quite likely, I felt at the last election, could probably look a lot like the 2010 election for the Conservatives, where they end up making gains across the board, but probably not enough. That would, what I think, the most likely successful scenario that isn't just making progress like they did in the 80s back from the abyss, where they end up in a position where they can go into a coalition with a Liberal Democrat or an SNP The latter of which is probably the most significant because Labour used to have loads of seats in Scotland. Scottish nationalism has posed a huge problem to them. There are seats that they just can't win there anymore. There's maybe a few that they can get back, but being able to do a deal with the SNP has been used against them by the Conservatives. But that's probably more likely than them winning outright, unless they get huge wins back in England, where they've always been weaker. There are towns across England which look like could be progress that Labour have never won before. There are towns like these places you've never heard of probably, but towns like Milton Keynes is a place that only existed since the Second World War. It was a newly built town, and it's commuter London belt, and there are places like that. There are places that have newer universities that have attracted young people, like Bournemouth on the south coast has never voted, I don't believe, a Labour member of Parliament, and it's got 3 constituencies to it that Labour could pick up, where there's a younger population has moved there. Places where they have made progress is around the city of Brighton, also on the south coast, where younger people have been moving with education or because there are newer jobs there, as opposed to where they've been losing in other coastal areas that have had different declining industries. So there's a strange smattering of seats across a large region that don't add up to a single big city, which I guess makes it harder to identify them. That they could change, and that would be winning these odd dots of red around sort of London, and probably there are places around Manchester as well, where socially minded, probably environmentally concerned, but highly educated people have left a city with a well-paying job, are residing, that could be changed over to Labour, but they've not made that breakthrough yet. That's what I imagine a Labour to change their fundamentals would have to look like, and it would not produce a map like they've seen previously. The red wall gets talked about far too much without ever being defined, and I think it broadly meant this sort of continuous swathe of red that crossed the map, and you could go from the Irish Sea to the North Sea without ever leaving a Labour seat. Like, that probably won't happen again, but they can do that by winning a lot of that, and then having a Conservative seat that's mostly farmlands, and then the major town in that county could go Labour, which they did in Canterbury and Kent in 2017, which they did in Lincoln in Lincolnshire in 2017. They lost one of those, but they could probably get it back, and it's those major towns within a county that they could look to make some more consistent successes. Is probably the what I perceive as their best strategy, and that's my tweet to fix the Labour Party, of which there is a great many.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully, Starmer reads this one. We'll send it right to party headquarters. So, are the English rurals completely off limits? Because that's something I can't wrap my head around.
Which area are we referring to?
Because I was surprised to see on our EU referendum map, there are a bunch of completely rural areas that still went for Remain, and I know you also have 2 advantages in the rural that we don't have in North America, which is lower religiosity, and probably almost and definitely a strong environment movement. But even with all that stuff, like, is there still no potential for Labour in the well-off English countryside?
In certain parts of it, yeah, there is still a difference between those well-off rural areas and some of the areas that do have rural poverty, where I think Labour, for all their backgrounds in unions and workers, etc., had never had a particularly good reputation with farm workers or agricultural economies. But there are areas like the seat of Rushcliffe, I think, is in Nottinghamshire rather than Leicestershire, but it used to be represented by Ken Clarke, who was a Conservative politician for several decades and was one of the nearly prime ministers that never got to be leader kind of men. Is one of these well-off, quite rural areas. I don't know what major town it it takes its name from outside of Nottingham, that was quite heavily Remain, and that when Ken Clarke stood down, retired, because he was the oldest man in Parliament at that time, it was quite a big drop off. Although it'd been safe seat thus his very long career. So there are certainly some areas like that. More commonly, the rural affluent areas are the places where the Liberal Democrats have managed to position themselves ahead as the more likely person to pick those up. A Labour going into coalition could well be with either the SNP or with Liberal Democrats who pick up these affluent rural seats in the south as well. Labour achieving minority would probably have to do something. Achieving majority would probably have to fundamentally do something that gets those voters to straight up switch to them, even if they've got a Liberal Democrat MP or think that the Liberal Democrats are close here, to get those voters to think this is my only option, this is the only party I want, and that perhaps feels like a longer way back from them. But getting a minor coalition partner, as 2010 showed, can also ultimately win you those seats in the same manner.
Yes, I'm familiar. I'm familiar that the Lib Dems have this greater rural strength in England that has existed for a very long time. So,
but it has shifted from what were poorer rural areas to more affluent ones, which is in line with what we've thought of as this new opportunity of political realignment. Those poorer rural areas that the Lib Dems used to be the challenges to the Conservatives, they've receded quite greatly, and it doesn't really look like anyone could challenge those places in many regards.
So that's been a shift as well. So that's Labour's issue. There's a bunch of bases and groups across the country that want to oppose the Conservatives, but knitting them together into a parliamentary majority is going to be a huge pain in the ass, because as long as you have the SNP going one way and the Lib Dems more attractive to some constituencies going the other way.
Yeah, Labour have struggled to work out what their coalition should be, and in feeling that those coalitions have particularly different interests to each other, has been much harder for them to resolve than the Conservatives have found of late. So unlike here, where the Liberals just completely have the jump on the NDP, so trying to appease the NDP's few remaining really highly educated or really union heavy seats just isn't really a first priority for the Liberal caucus as it is. Okay, well that's neat. I'm glad you were on here. I actually learned something.
Well, I think maybe I don't think we're getting much more for today. I think the only thing we're going to get would be the Vale of Glamorgan, which I think it's probably going to be close between Labour and the Conservatives. Maybe the Conservatives take it. Honestly, Labour might hold it now. That might be another wrong call on our map, but it could be an interesting call there, though. But anyway, I think we'll probably wrap this up for today. I think we'll have Jason on our podcast some point in the future, if you'd love to, and we could talk about the final results from all this.
Come back as your resident UK person.
Before you go, can you explain how the constituency votes go in Wales? I'm not sure what you mean by that.
What do you mean?
Yeah, I don't. He says, explain how the constituency votes go. I don't know what he means by that. So basically, they vote in each constituency. When are they due? Yeah, we'll get them today. We should have Vale of Glamorgan soon, and at that point, then they have all the list votes counted. They will release all the list votes at one just dump. So that will answer your question there. So at that point, then you'll know how everything. We'll have full results from Wales today. We are not going to have full results from Scotland today. Today is in Canada.
I would imagine full constituency results today in the UK, where it's presently 10 p.m. Because of that, and the people in those polling stations have been working quite consistently. They are probably going to take the night off. They might have decided, I don't know if there's reported, because a lot of these are volunteers, to let them go for the night and come back and then continue on things. Because it is getting quite late in the UK, especially if they started counting yesterday. They're probably taking sensible measures about managing the people that they have on site there. So
So we'll see. I will probably get everything from Wales today. Probably not, definitely not Scotland, and maybe we might get a first round of London Mayor today. Who knows? London takes forever to count, but yeah, like today within the UK, I'm not sure the dope dude where you're from. If you're from North America, by the time you go to bed tonight, we'll definitely have Vale of Glamorgan results, and probably we'll know the exact seat count in Wales, and then we'll be able to compare that to the lane toss-up model. Other than that, though, yeah, I think we'll have Jason on at some point in the future just to discuss all the results, because we still don't have results for some of the mayors, some of the councils. Are we going to go live for London and Scotland tomorrow? No, I don't think so. I think there's only a couple seats left in Scotland to declare. They're probably going to be declared pretty early, considering the fact they've been doing a lot of counting already. So they'll be declared pretty early and pretty quickly, and London is going to be kind of pretty boring. So I think we'll take tomorrow off. But we'll be back with a podcast, though, probably next week or so, talking about all the results and what it all means, and Labour's path forward, though. So thank you, everybody, for coming on today. It's been fun. It's been fun doing the results with you guys, and it's a shame we couldn't do this all last night. If we had been able to do this last night when all the results were coming in, and that would have been great. But because of the COVID, we couldn't do it. But when we do get another UK election, though, we'll definitely be going live on that time, and doing stuff like that. So thank you, everybody, for joining us, and have a good well, it's kind of night now, so yeah, have a good night.